This podcast is brought to you on Roku and Fire TV by Pod Nation Podcast TV. Find us on X, Facebook, Instagram, or wherever podcasts are broadcast. Download our app and never miss a show with video on demand, as well as exclusive content found only on Pod Nation TV.
And welcome back to
Monster
Conversation,
the annual crossover between the Monster Island Film Vault and
Kaiju Conversation.
Because we got to celebrate our birthdays. Yours, mine,
yours,
and Ray's.
Mine's, and Ray's.
Yeah, yours, mine, and Ray's.
Which is the name of a band, as we decided last time. Yours, mine's, and Ray's.
Yours, mine's, and Ray's. Yeah, there you go. But happy birthday, Elijah.
Happy birthday, Nathan.
Yes, and you have just entered a new decade. Congratulations.
Blubber knuckles. I didn't even think about that till you just said it. Oh, no.
No, you've thought about it. We've had conversations about this.
Well, I try to forget it because now I will be called old.
Oh, come on. Come on. Are you trying to say Final Wars is old?
Okay, so funny story. So I was actually talking with a coworker like a couple months ago. And I found out the song Yeah by Ushers came out in 2004. It was right after the Super Bowl. And she was like, yeah, that song's old. That was when I was in high school. And I said, excuse me, what? And she was like, yeah, that's like old. I was in high school. And I said, that came out the same year I was born. So are you saying I'm old? And she was like, no. Like she started backing up. It was like a song is old, like a car is old, a person's not old. I'm like, that doesn't make sense. Like you're moving the goalpost. And I was like, you know what? Here, we're going to ask another person to get their opinion. So I walked up to one of my other coworkers. She's a really nice old lady. I'm like, hey, is something from the year 2004 old? And she was like, yeah. My heart dropped. I was crestfallen.
Crestfallen. That's a fancy word. I like it. It's kind of funny that we're bringing all this up because we were doing we were playing a little bit of a game before we started recording where we were looking up Zoomer and Boomer terms and seeing if we could figure out what they were. It was just kill a little time before we started doing this because, hey, when the intrepid producer's away, the mice will play because Jimmy's out on a date with his fiance. So it's just you and me today, Mr.
Right.
Thomas.
Yeah. And honestly, all this, this all comes from talking about birthdays, but I even like talking podcasts and you and I can actually we both started in air quotes in 2019. Mm-hmm. It's been 5 years.
I know.
We have done our respective shows for 5 years. And for me, that has been a huge shock. Thinking back and realizing 5 years of my life have been devoted. For me, that's a quarter of my life has been devoted to podcasting and starting to push my career forward. Mm-hmm. And, it's kind of novel. Obviously, if you've listened to the show and you've, looked at my social medias, you know that it's kind of
which
starting
you didn't have before you got podcasting. Lucky you.
Very true. Lucky me. Yeah. No, that's true. I only got on social media because of the podcast. I felt like I had to have a social media presence.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
That's a joke.
I've listened to your show so much, and that whole scripted outro is such a shtick now.
Oh yeah, no,
you're
it's
probably,
not going anywhere.
I think the only people who have it better memorized than me is you and Rex.
Rex doesn't have it memorized.
Oh, then
we've actually talked about it. We've talked about it. He does not. He would have to say it to remember it. Even then, I don't really remember it that well. The only part, oddly enough, that I remember, and this is solely because Danny is so bad at being, self-promo, and a huge thanks to Danny DeManna of the Godzilla Novelization Project for his vocals on our theme song. You can follow him on Twitter at Danzilla93_GNP or visit his website, GodzillaNovelizationProject.com.
Hey.
And a huge thanks to Grattan Count. Like that part I have memorized.
I was going to say, save the shameless self-promotion for the
Okay,
end
but
there.
Danny and Grattan deserve as much promotion for their amazing work
sure.
that they do.
Oh, for sure. They
Hashtag we stand with Danny and Grattan.
Yeah, I mean, Danny needs to. This is going to be like the weirdest insult ever, but Danny needs to learn to take more compliments. I'll just leave it at that.
No, he's humble.
Yeah.
That's part of the magic behind Danny is he's so humble.
Yeah, but
he has so much knowledge. He should write a book. Like he's good at.
He and I have been talking about it for a long time. We just need to actually find the time and make it happen. But anyway, speaking of making time and looking backward and all that, this is our annual crossover to talk about a Harryhausen movie, and because of something that you said but don't remember. we have been going backwards because I said, hey, how should we do this? It's like, let's go backwards. I'm like, okay, we'll go backwards. Anyway, we're in our reverse chronology here. We are now on to the second of the 3 Sinbad movies that Mr. Harryhausen has worked on. We will be talking about the Golden Voyage of Sinbad, which will have decidedly fewer references to Rocky III and Foreigner. I'm sorry.
But will it have a golden review, or will it turn out to be sour and more tarnished than you thought? Stay tuned on Monster Conversation Harryhausen Annual number 3.
Hot dang. Flexing those DJ muscles. I like it. Speaking of flexing DJ muscles, tell all the lovely peoples what goes down in this movie.
Yeah, so in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. But what he didn't create is a mysterious flying creature that drops a golden-plated medallion onto Sinbad's ship. As they investigate this medallion, they realize that it could be a bad omen. But the little creature tries to rescue this medallion piece before it is metaphorically shoved off at that. Then Sinbad has a wet dream of sorts and sails off to a distant planet's land. Comes our hero, Sinbad Man. Upon arrival, Doctor Who, dressed as an evil witch, tries to steal the medallion from him, but he rides on a horse. On the steel horse he rides, wanted, dead or alive, into a city, where he meets the Metal Man, but not the Hercules Moon Metal Man, a regular Metal Man, who just so happens to look like Deadpool when he's not wearing his mask. As Sinbad the Metal Man and his crew set off on a voyage, a golden voyage, you roll your title, on their 3-year journey to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations. They boldly go where no man has gone before. Spain. On this trip, joining them is some deadbeat son, a dashing young woman, and the Metal Man. They're on a journey to search for the last remaining piece of the gold medallion, which is said to bring riches hitherto unknown on this very planet. But following closely behind is Doctor Who, dressed as an evil witch, and his merry men. This kind of sounds like Robin Hood to a certain extent. As they journey on through the 3-year journey into the oceans of uncharted waters, they meet an interesting side cliff where they have matted out all the people welcoming and saying hello with carvings into the side of a mountain. As they journey through these rocky woods, there's actually no woods, it's just rocky. They discover King Kong wannabes that have their own god deity. Then some fighting happens, some swordplay. Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones happens.
Oh,
then,
I got flashbacks to other Star Wars movies, but okay.
Is that not the one with the dude that has the 6 arms?
So that's Episode 3.
Oh, Star Wars Episode 3, The Revenge of the Sith, or whatever it is, happens.
Yes.
Plan 69 happens, but there's no 69. The lady gets dropped into a pit where a wannabe King Kong is at, takes her away. Then suddenly all the merry men follow her. During all of this, Doctor Who gets the third piece of this medallion, and he becomes Doctor Who again. Except he doesn't age this time. Following this, Sinbad and his merry men, with the dashing young woman and the beat-knit son, all find Doctor Who, and a battle of good and evil occurs that shall go on for eternity unless mortal men get involved, which they do multiple times. And it ends up just being a battle of mortal men. I don't know why they included that part. Oh, did I mention that Quint from Jaws is in here, but he didn't want to be in here? Yeah, he's in here and didn't want to be in here. He did not open wide, and he disappeared. And he got paid a lot of money for 20 minutes. Sounds like a prostitute, if you ask me. Anyways, moving on, Doctor Who ends up dying, and Sinbad gives the Hercules Moon Man Deadpool guy the crown, and he becomes a dashing old man and a king. And then Sinbad gets with the dashing young woman who's probably 20 years younger than him. Really Robert De Niroing it, or Jeff Goldbluming it, or Mick Jaggering it. He's got the moves like Jagger. Or
DiCaprioing it?
Nah, because DiCaprio doesn't actually get with anybody once they turn a certain age. See, if DiCaprio was in this movie, she would have been too old by the time the movie ended for him.
Ah, true.
Oh, did I mention boobs?
As in stupid
and that's
people?
The movie.
As in stupid people?
No. But that's the movie.
Yeah. That's the movie, but yes.
There was no yeeting in this one.
Yeah, you did leave out one important point. The figurehead lady.
You mean the Star Wars Episode 3 person?
The masthead came to life.
Oh. And Groot shows up for about 20 minutes.
Yeah. The Bride of Frankenstein
I forgot about
masthead. That. Anyway, so yes, that's the movie. I'm not going to bury the lead too much because I know we're going to get into the pre-production of this. But I'm going to tell you right now, I want to know why more people don't talk about this movie from Harryhausen's filmography, because I think more people need to talk about it.
So let me offer a possible idea. I think a lot of it comes down to, after the 50s, you kind of see that people don't really talk about Harryhausen's work outside of Jason. Because that was 63.
63? 63. So, yeah, because Jason and the Argonauts is probably the most iconic movie he ever made.
Yeah. But outside of that, when you look at his filmography, you've got like Valley of Gwangi, which we know historically did not do well. The Three Worlds of Gulliver, Mysterious Island, which that film I think has been done so many times that it just kind of gets lost in the
it's
total...
almost a pseudo sequel. That film version's almost a pseudo sequel to the Disney version of 20,000 Leagues.
Yeah, and then you've got like First Men in the Moon, which is one of my personal favorites just because of how deep into science fiction it goes. And then you've got the 1 Million Years BC, which is also
known for other reasons.
It's known for other reasons. and lizards that aren't stop motion, partially. And then you get into the 70s, which is his two Sinbad movies, which to me, Seventh Voyage is so iconic, it kind of overshadows the following two. And then you also get, I mean, Eye of the Tiger, I think, is just forgetful. I remember, like, I literally talked about in our recording of it, how it made me fall asleep.
Right.
It just, to me, it didn't really resonate. And then you have his grand finale with Clash of the Titans, which everybody knows. So in a way, it feels like these two Sinbad movies, along with Guanji, First Man on the Moon, are kind of sandwiched between his like good run of a handful of movies that are like really popular and really well known, and his grandiose finale with Clash of the Titans.
Yeah, I will definitely say that his 70s work, yeah, I do think because it's sandwiched between a couple of major high points, tends to be overlooked, but I would argue that Golden Voyage still needs to be talked about more. I can understand why people would forget about Eye of the Tiger, but I do think there's a lot of great stuff here in Golden Voyage. In fact, for what it's worth, Screen Rant ranked Golden Voyage as the best Sinbad movie of all time. It's Screen Rant, so I take it with a kaiju-sized grain of salt, but...
My only thing to that is most of the... So if we're talking Harryhausen, right? You know, the big thing about Harryhausen films is they're not identified by the director as much as they are the special effects director, right? Mm-hmm. And for this film, he also got producer credit, Ray Harryhausen did, which was a rare occurrence for him.
And story credit.
Story credit, correct. But the thing about it is none of the creations in this are really unique or outstanding characters. You know, some of them, one of the characters, the homunculus, kind of gives me Ymir vibes.
Which I read in an Animated Life, Harryhausen's book, that the homunculus was inspired a bit by the Ymir, specifically the birth scene.
The centaur reminds me of, I want to say it's Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, has a similar character, the giant.
Cyclops.
The Cyclops, yes.
Yeah, and there's a Cyclops in Jason as well.
And, you know, like the Griffin, granted this came out after, but the Griffin kind of has a similar thing to the Pegasus. You know, it's kind of the same concept, but the Pegasus was done way better. Mm-hmm. Oh, and you have the deity, which, I mean, admittedly, that's really cool.
Kali.
But
which we'll get into that, because Kali, the scene with Kali was the moment that really made me like, why don't more people talk about this? Like that, the entire Kali sequence, I think, is Harryhausen at his best. One of them. That needs to go into the highlight reel.
I would agree, but I also would say you have the skeleton fight in Argonauts.
Oh, no, I'm saying like that, the Kali sequence needs to be included in the highlight reel, but I will admit, we'll get into it a little bit more. When you get to later on in the sequence, I'm like, okay, yeah, this is Jason. This is Jason again.
Yeah.
But the dance sequence and when the fight with Sinbad starts, and I'm like, good Lord, which, you know, we'll get into that.
My whole point here is, I mean, it's got some great points and some great concepts and some great ideas, but I think a lot of these ideas had already been done before, or they would be perfected later on. To me, this does kind of sit as this is Harryhausen at his best, redoing the things that he was trying to perfect already, that he had done, which I would argue he already reached perfection, but you know, that's a discussion for as we move on here.
Right. So I know you like talking about the pre-production, production, all that fun stuff on your show. So we're going to give that a little bit of a try this year. So yeah. I've got some notes here from An Animated Life, which shout out to Danny DeMana, our friend Danny DeMana, for getting that for me for, I believe, for Christmas. It's been a very welcome resource as I have continued to delve deeper into Harryhausen's filmography. So for what I've read, and this is by no means an extensive history here. Definitely read the book for more detail. The initial inspiration for this came to Harryhausen about a decade before this, when he made a series of drawings that had a giant guarding the entrance to the city of Petra, an oracle, a centaur, a dancing Shiva, which is another Hindu god, and not the same one that's in this film. That's Kali, and a magician creating a homunculus, not gullus, cullis, right? So he said he met with two people in 1965 who created outlines for the story, and those were A. Sandform Wolf and Jan Reed, but he thought both of their outlines were just too complex, because they were trying to, it's like, here's some drawings I made. Can you make a story out of this? And he thought it was just a little too complex, and then he just shelved it for a little while, worked on some other projects like Guanji and all that. And, and then after Guanji, he's like, hey, we should get back to doing a Sinbad movie. When did he get back to doing more of the fantasy stuff?
Yeah, because he had met with longtime collaborator and producer Charles H. Sheener and talked about how it had been a long time since Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, and they both agreed they wanted to go back to the Arabian Nights tales and do that again. And so that's kind of where it began, fully being realized in the pre-production process.
Yeah, and the interesting reason why they went with that is, one, because Harryhausen felt like he knew that very well, and also because Charles, what was his last name?
Charles H. Schneer. S-C-H-N-E-E-R.
Schneer actually thought that it would be good because people weren't really using that anymore to make films.
It was kind of a bygone era. When you think about it, there's obviously the Thief of Baghdad, the 1924 version, the 1940 version.
Yeah, which the 1940 version was very important to Harryhausen.
Yes. You have, Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, Jason and the Argonauts. Well, that's Greek. Same kind of concept, going back to these pulpish stories.
Classic stories.
These tales of the gods and whatnot, and exploring them, which, when you think about it, oddly enough, has once again kind of disappeared. That's not really something we see. We saw it partially in the Pirates of the Caribbean series, which you and I talked about extensively last time, how it's very much inspired by the swashbucklers and the Harryhausen films of the 1960s and 70s. But it is a type of film, a genre of film that, oddly enough, for some reason, does not like to stick around.
Yeah. Which is too bad, because I like swashbucklers.
Yeah, and I think it is definitely a genre. And notice, as soon as the Pirates of the Caribbean films became popular, you saw Clash of the Titans, the remake come out, and then eventually we had a sequel to that. So. And there was also a remake of Jack the Giant Killer with Jack the Giant Slayer, which was a knockoff of the Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, the original version. So oddly enough, in the late 2000s and the early 2010s, we saw that kind of resurgence again, but it doesn't stay long. It's a handful of films, and then it backs way off. And so they were trying to bring that back, and I don't necessarily think they really did, because I think by this point Harryhausen was the only one who was doing it, with Golden Voyage, then Eye of the Tiger, and concluding with Clash of the Titans.
And all three of those, like you said, they feel like they were part of a bygone era. I mean, this is the early 70s, and it already feels a little bit of a bygone. Certainly Eye of the Tiger and Clash of the Titans do. Clash of the Titans feels a little bit more of its time. Eye of the Tiger felt a little out of place. Like, this should have been made about 15 years earlier, around the same time as Jason and the Argonauts. Because I felt like that was the the early to mid 60s was kind of the last time frame, the prime time frame for these kind of fantasy epics in that sort of a style. Once you get to the 80s, fantasy epics come back, but they are very different.
Right, yeah, because when you look at it, so the 70s, you had Taxi Driver, you had Jaws, Close Encounters of the Third Kind,
Star Wars.
and then Star Wars. Star Wars was it was the beginning of the new era of fantasy, something that takes these classic tales but modernizes them, or in case of Star Wars, takes it to another world. They tried to make it's the same concepts, it's the same stories found in these older fiction epics, but it is in a whole new context. You know, in the Star Wars franchise, you have a princess, you have the chosen hero, you have this mythical force, like you have all that stuff.
Wizards, mentors, Jedi Knights, all of that sort of stuff. And also, it should be noted, Kurosawa influence as well.
Right. But that was the beginning of a new era. And then following that, when you talk about fantasy films in the 80s, I immediately think of Highlander, this idea of modern, like legitimately bringing these stories to the modern day, these modern epics, and making them
an urban fantasy is what those are.
Yeah.
That's
turning them into that.
Yeah, but you also had more. You also had some more quote unquote traditional fantasies with things like Never-Ending Story and Conan the Barbarian and Legend and things like that. It was the 80s was like a prime era for fantasy films. It was crazy, but Harryhausen got out of the business by then, and probably and then you had people who came in and kind of filled that gap with like Phil Tippett with his special effects techniques, obviously inspired by Harryhausen,
right,
and Will O'Brien and all that.
Example,
but still, he was taking Harryhausen's work and kind of building off of it. So, like all that to say, this does feel like a throwback to a certain extent. It feels a little out of place, which is kind of interesting that since we're doing this in reverse order, that we're getting we're starting to notice that.
In a way, this film does feel, because I think we can both agree that Eye of the Tiger felt like a step back, step down. In a way, Golden Voyage is his last hurrah before his time felt like it was over. This is his last film, and then he did Eye of the Tiger, which feels out of place, and then Clash of the Titans, which was his grandiose finale. This is him kind of taking his final bow before he is no longer top of the line special effects.
Yeah, for sure. But in the development process for this film, there were a couple of different iterations of the script that they went through when they started taking this more seriously. One of those differences was the name of the villain had changed. In the original outline that Harryhausen himself put together, he was named Jaffa. And when he's defeated at the end, he takes a drink from the Fountain of Youth, which later became the Fountain of Destiny. And he kept regressing in age until he shriveled up like a mummy.
Interesting.
There was also an entire sequence that was taken out. It was called the Valley of Snakes or Valley of Vipers, which would have been this area where a bunch of snakes would have popped out of the ground to grab at our heroes before as they're coming up to the temple. And Mr. Schneer rejected that because, one, he didn't like snakes, and two, for whatever reason, he thought it would upset pregnant women. Even Harryhausen said in his book he was baffled by that. He still doesn't get it. The script itself was written by Brian Clemens, who wrote several fantasy films for Hammer before this, but he's best known as the creator of the British spy series, The Avengers.
Right. Now, it's also important to note that while he wrote it, Harryhausen was deeply involved in the creation process. He created all the concept art. He helped decide the cast. He helped with the editing process. And that's how he got his producer credits. But he talked to the writer, Mr. Clemens, very closely. And they talked about and figured out how exactly the story would follow through. Originally, the Centaur was going to be a Neanderthal man.
Yep.
But that eventually got scrapped and moved to Eye of the Tiger. And so the film, in a way, is very interesting for that fact that Harryhausen got to be so deeply involved this time around.
Now, not everything he wanted made it through, obviously, because this draft actually included a pre-credit sequence that would have introduced the homunculus and showed the audience how the vizier got scarred, because it would have been the homunculus who would have done it. He would have snuck up onto the snuck up to the vizier while he's sleeping and then poured boiling liquid on his face.
Oh.
And Harryhausen was like, "Oh, that's a great way to shock people right at the beginning." And
I think it would have been too shocking.
Yeah, it was cut.
I'm not surprised by that. I think that would have been too shocking for audiences to open with this guy being burned.
Yep. And then in a second draft, the vizier did not wear a mask. In the first draft, he had a mask, and then in the final draft, he had a mask. But in the second draft, he did not have a mask. He had an ape face, because Harryhausen wanted to do a baboon. Again, that got carried over to Eye of the Tiger.
Which was inspired by the original The Arabian Nights tales.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. And the fountain in this draft was going to be a column of fire, and the keeper would have emerged from it. But that got dropped because they decided that it would probably be a little too difficult to animate.
Yeah, you can see throughout this film they were trying to figure out loopholes and try to speed up the process, even though it ended up being a very lengthy process from what I could find.
Yeah. Because they finished the live action filming in 1972, and the movie did not, and they did that in maybe about 2 months, and then the film didn't release until late 1973 into 1974.
Yeah, filming was June through August of 1972, so they were filming on his birthday.
Mm-hmm.
And so, actually, from what I read, the process ended up being about 3 years, I believe it was, in terms of production. Yes, 3 years to produce. They filmed in 72, editing in late 72, early 73. And prior to that, I believe, or actually during all of that, I think they were working on the stop motion.
Yeah. And Harryhausen actually said at one point in an animated life, he's like, "Man, sometimes I just was hard on myself. I just gave myself all really difficult tasks to do." He's like, but I did it, basically. But he said there were some points where he's like, "Yeah, I think at some point I might have scaled back." Another quick little detail in this second draft, the Lemurians were blue and not green, and their goddess was named Caro, Caro. Caro. The name of the goddess was changed to Kali because they anticipated filming in India. That did not happen because, well, they were going to do it initially because Hollywood studios had been investing a lot of money to make movies there. But after a while, they're like, well, we've dumped a bunch of money in there, so we might want to actually go film there to get a return on investment. But apparently, it was a nightmare to film over there because of local laws and all the red tape.
Yes.
So, because they heard that it was not fun to film there, they ended up going to Spain instead.
Right. They filmed in the Royal Palace of La Almaculino in Palma, Majorca. And then they also filmed in the caves of Arta and Torrent de Paris.
The location filmmaking in this is gorgeous, which I think we brought up before when we were talking about Eye of the Tiger. Eye of the Tiger has some great scenery in it. I think this one's better though.
This film, I mean, I think a lot of Harryhausen's films carry that grandiose stage setup, whether they're on a sound stage or whether they're on location filming, it feels very big. It feels very grandiose. It feels like an event film, and it ends up working out very well and looks very beautiful.
It does. And then I found interesting when they were finalizing the script. And this is something I noticed while watching the movie. They actually brought in an Arabic language expert to add Arabic phrases to make it feel more authentic, which I think explains why the name of Allah is invoked a lot in this movie.
It's invoked a lot.
A lot, yeah. Especially compared to Eye of the Tiger. And apparently, the line of the movie, because it comes back a couple of times, that was added by this expert is "Trust on Allah, but tie up your camel."
Yes.
I thought that was pretty cool, and also just really quick, like the Lemurian architecture was inspired by Khmer. I hope I said that right. In Western India, and the lost city of Angkor in Cambodia. There wasn't a whole lot in the book about the casting or the actual filming. It was more focused on the special effects. But Tom Baker, who famously played the Fourth Doctor on Doctor Who, this was actually before he was on Doctor Who. He was cast largely because of his striking eyes and because he reminded Harryhausen of Conrad Veidt, who was in the 1940 version of Thief of Baghdad, playing a similar character.
Funny enough, Christopher Lee originally was going to play the role of Korra, but it ended up being Tom Baker. And this is the film that would get him the Doctor Who role as executive producer of Doctor Who from 1970 to 1981. Barry Letts saw the film and thought he would have been great, and the rest is history. He became arguably the pinnacle 1900s Doctor Who.
Yeah, he is one of the most popular and iconic actors to play the character, and he still holds the record for the longest tenure as the Doctor. He did it for 7 years.
He loved it.
Yeah, he loved it.
He still loves it.
Yeah.
And he's came back multiple times and done little appearances.
Yeah. Now, I will admit, when I was watching him, I went into this knowing he was going to be in it. And fun fact, just to remind everybody, Eye of the Tiger has another Doctor Who actor in it, Patrick Troughton, playing a kind of a weirdly similar role as well. Well, no, it wasn't the villain. He was an old wizard guy. So he's basically the Doctor again. But that was after he was the Doctor. I knew he was in this movie, but I didn't quite recognize him at first because he looks very different. If you're used to seeing him as the Doctor when he's got the hat and the big poofy hair and things like that, you won't necessarily recognize him quickly. It was his voice that clued me into it because he has a very distinctive voice.
Right. Yeah, no, it's actually pretty difficult to actually see him in the role. When my only experience with him and my only what I've watched him in is Doctor Who. Mm-hmm. When I went to look for him, I was like, man, that's really hard to tell that is Tom Baker. Yeah. But I think that adds to just how great of an actor he is because they don't.
I would argue
they don't even act the same.
I was going to say I would argue he's probably the best actor in this movie. I don't want to give away our ranking toward the end, but just his presence in this movie elevates it above Eye of the Tiger for me.
It's very obvious this was early in his career because he is trying super hard to, in a way, upstage every other actor and actress. Because in all honesty, most of these actors had already been through their career. This was towards the book, and a lot of them were in films throughout the 50s and 60s.
Yeah, except maybe Caroline Munro. She was still relatively fresh.
Yeah, she was still relatively fresh, but the rest of them either didn't have much of filmography before or after this, or they had already been in dozens of films. And to their unfortunate, it kind of seemed like a lot of the people in this film were calling it in. Even one of the actors, Martin Shaw, went out of his way to say, I don't want to do this. This is below... it's Robert Shaw.
There's Martin Shaw and Robert Shaw who played the same character. It's just that one is the voice and one is the actual face actor.
Martin Shaw is the one who acts. Robert Shaw, no,
it's Robert Shaw is the face actor. Martin Shaw does the voice because he's the Oracle. They are the Oracle. Originally, it was the voice. I was a little confused because in the book it says, we were going to get Unicron. Citizen K.
Orson Welles.
They were originally going to get Orson Welles. I'll turn in my nerd card later. They were originally going to get Orson Welles to play him, and I'm like, wow, you're going to put him all that crazy makeup and stuff? I got some clarification later. It's no, they wanted him to do the voice. But then he doubled his price at the last second, and they're like, well, we can't do that. So then they went and got the Martin Shaw, who was on vacation at the time, and they're just like, hey, can you come in and do this? Or was it Robert Shaw?
He played the character with the makeup,
Okay.
but he didn't want to be known.
Yeah.
Neither of them, to my understanding, really wanted to be recognized as the Oracle. Robert Shaw actually ended up going uncredited because he felt the film was below him. He thought that a fantasy film was not good enough for him.
And yet,
and so
didn't he? He went on to. You said it was Jaws, right?
He did Jaws.
Quint.
Robert Shaw did Jaws.
Say, yeah, it was Quint.
That's a little different.
Yeah.
But in all regards, it seems like a lot of the people behind this film really didn't. They were just kind of doing it. You know, it was another gig. It was a job. They got money for it. And like even Martin Shaw, like to do it, he ended up getting paid £5,000, which once you convert that to modern day pounds and then to US dollar, he ended up getting $96,432,034.
What?
To do like 3-4 minutes of footage. Like he was on set for 20 minutes and he got paid almost $1 million or $100,000.
Oh, okay. I was just like, wait, what? That's some serious inflation there.
Yeah, 96,432,134, right? 96, yeah. Which I mean, that's still a lot for what little he did in the film.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like he was on vacation. He didn't really want to do it and things like that, you know. So it was wild. And like I mentioned, Caroline Munro, she was still pretty new at the time. And she's definitely the eye candy.
Well, that's why they brought her on, was because they wanted the sex appeal in a G-rated movie.
Yeah,
so they
G-rated sex appeal. I think we talked about that a bit with Eye of the Tiger as well. Like there's actual nude scenes where they just cut at the right points and film it at just the right points where you don't
Funny enough, in Golden Voyage, there actually was a nip slip that in the VHS version was visible, but in future releases, they went in and digitally added hair, so you couldn't actually see that slip. But oddly enough, the reason she got this was because I believe it was the director, I think, or it would have been the writer
Clemens.
I believe it was the writer, worked with her on another film. He was actually the director of the film. They worked on writer and director, and because of her in that, she landed this gig because he was like, oh, here's this person. And she ended up getting backed and she was cast in it. They wanted somebody who was more popular, but because of that good relationship on their previous film, that's how she landed the role. And funny enough, as time went on, she ended up being a trustee for the Ray Harryhausen Foundation.
This is true. And the Vizier's mask was based on a Persian warrior design. It was made of fiberglass. It had to be polished every day. I kind of figured... Once I read this, like, yeah, I can see that now because I've seen 300. I saw a lot of masks that looked like that. So you'll notice there is a mix of cultures in this, which we talked about in Eye of the Tiger as well. But there's not quite as much in this one, but there's still a fair mix.
Right. And I think a lot of that comes down to, I mean, we see this in tons of films. You know, you could call it ignorance, but it's not really ignorance as much as it's on purpose. It's the blending of cultures that these filmmakers really do appreciate and love. And with that, we get to see this very fantastic concept of these different types of culture being mixed in to create something even more magical. You know, we see this, you know, throwing it out there. Michael Dougherty did that for Godzilla King of the Monsters. You see that in Paul W.S. Anderson's Alien versus Predator film. You know, this idea of multiple cultures being mixed, it creates something a little more fantastic, a little more exciting for people to watch. There's various types of culture in this film and various influences. I'm going to talk about it, but there's very obvious King Kong influence here.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Ray Harryhausen absolutely wanted to include, which is a whole nother level of like inspiration from previous films. So it's really nice to see a film like this showcase so much inspiration and admiration for various cultures, popular films, and mix it in a way that really makes it proves the the live long statement, the magic of the movies. It proves that to be a very true statement.
For sure, for sure. I mean, even the homunculus. I'm gonna get it right. I mean, that's not attached to a specific culture necessarily, but it is a term that comes from ancient alchemy. So if anyone here ever watched Full Metal Alchemist, you'll be familiar with this term. But it was for a humanoid figure that is brought to life using chemicals and magic, because that's kind of what alchemy ends up being. It's a little hard to pin down what exactly alchemy is. It's a bizarre practice, but something that I know you'll appreciate hearing about this from a filmmaker's standpoint, Elijah. They opted to go with a more realistic and grounded color palette in this film compared to Seventh Voyage, because they were dealing with mysticism and not a magic lamp.
Yeah, and I want to say that's partially because that film was shot in Technicolor, if I remember correctly. I think that was a Technicolor film, which was dying by the 1970s, which kind of sucks because Technicolor is a type of film stock that when it was developed, it made the colors pop out more. The saturation was turned up. And that is something, I appreciate the concept and the idea of like not using Technicolor to make it a little more dour. But there is something about the beautiful Technicolor film stock that just generated a more exciting film. Mm-hmm. Now, granted, you do see like the concept of like neon lighting that appears in 80s films a lot, kind of mimics that. And, some films now use high saturation in their videos and when they're recording on digital cameras to mimic that in a way, not necessarily mimic, but it's the same concept. But it is a little, you can't get that Technicolor look of those 1950s and 60s films. And, to me, that's kind of depressing in a way, because we will never have films like those Technicolor films ever again.
No, not quite. And speaking of doing things the old-fashioned way, the long shots of Moravia were actually paintings. So basically matte paintings created by Emilio Ruiz del Rio, who specialized in film paintings, and they are gorgeous.
Yeah, this film utilizes a lot of very amazing concepts of old style filmmaking. It uses the matte paintings, it uses composite shots, superimposition, blue screen, I believe, was used for rear projection. I don't know if that one was used necessarily.
Oh no, I read in the book in Harryhausen's book. It was, yeah.
Okay. Miniatures, it uses very rare miniatures, puppets, stop motion. But it also, one of the things I appreciated about the film in general on a technical standpoint was the use of crane shots. There's a couple shots on some of the sounds, on a couple of the sound stages that they use that look really good. I'm specifically thinking of when they arrive to their destination and they're walking around. There are some shots that were done on a soundstage that utilize crane shots, and they look really beautiful. But I'm a sucker for crane shots in general.
Yeah. And just some behind the scenes things with the special effects. Funny enough, and I kind of noticed this, like, these don't necessarily, I think I brought this up in the Eye of the Tiger discussion we had last year, that these don't necessarily look like old Arabic ships. And for sure, one of the things that ancient Arabic ships didn't have was figureheads. Mm-hmm. But this idea that Harryhausen had of the figurehead coming to life, everyone liked it so much that they just went with it. And Elsa Lancaster from Bride of Frankenstein was the inspiration for the masthead design. Specifically her hair.
Interesting.
Yep. Unfortunately, the figurehead was incorrectly labeled a siren by the publicity department. That was a little something that Harryhausen mentioned that he said kind of bugged him. And the bubbles that you see when the figurehead sinks to the bottom of the ocean, that was done using Alka-Seltzer tablets.
I love that. That's a nice little cheap method to create those. I love that.
Some found effects there.
I'd absolutely use those effects if I ever needed them.
Oh, yeah, I know you would. And Kali alone, that Kali sequence took 2 months to animate. Interestingly, Kali is a Hindu goddess of destruction. She's often called the Dark Mother. In mythology, she had 4 arms and was associated with cannibalism and was said to be a consort of the god Shiva. Obviously, they toned down the cannibalism and gave her 6 arms in this. Harryhausen actually hired an Indian dancer, named Surya Kamari, and one of her students who would ride on her back to create the dance sequence. And then on set, when they were filming, they would have 3 stuntmen belted together, so that's how they got the 6 swords. And they played Kali and under the supervision of Fernando Poggi. And there were 3 Indian musicians who created the music just for the dance sequence, while Miklos Rosa did the rest of the movie.
Yes.
So they took special care with that sequence.
And it's very interesting to watch that sequence because you can kind of see where they composited in the stop motion. Specifically on the ground, you can see it's a little lighter in terms of the color for the sand, where the goddess is walking, in contrast to where Sinbad and his merry men are. And I thought that was really interesting. And then, of course, there's going to be some compositing issues as they layered the film cells together. But overall, I think it's a very effective sequence in terms of how they did it technically.
That for me, I was just enraptured watching that entire sequence because I think that is a technical marvel. In some ways, I do think it ended up paving the way for Medusa in Clash of the Titans, because obviously there's a lot more parts that needed to be animated with all the snakes. But I am just sitting here thinking to myself, man, Harryhausen is sitting there animating 6 arms plus 2 legs for a dance sequence with 1 character. No wonder it took 2 months, because that is just nuts. Not just the dance sequence and then a fight scene. Like, it is absolutely insane. That's why I always say the dance sequence in particular, I think, really stands out to me. Now, once the fight starts, it kind of turns into Jason and the Argonauts again. But the dance sequence is absolutely fantastic, and that needs to be included in any Harryhausen highlight reel. In fact, Harryhausen actually said in his book that, he said, I never won any Oscars or even got nominated for any of my work, but my entire career until I got, the honorary one later as a lifetime achievement or whatever. But he did say that they sent that scene to the Oscar committee for consideration, and the Academy, and for best special effects, and they thought it was an actual mechanical thing that they had on set.
Yeah, it's really interesting just in general. And this is something, if we talked about it every time, it would be rather redundant, but it's really weird to see how Harryhausen, time and time again, whether you look at Beast or Gwanji or Clash of the Titans or any of the Sinbad films or any of his work, the stop motion effects are top of the line. And when you consider that, some of the films that won, I want to say it was 1 million BC, the 1940 film that utilized real lizards to be the dinosaurs in that film, won best special effects whenever you have stuff like this, and it didn't win. That to me really baffles me, how they really snubbed him time and time again.
Yeah, because I will guarantee you his special effects had a bigger impact on cinema and just culture in general than probably most of those other ones.
Right, and I believe, if I remember correctly, Star Wars one, which, obviously, like we already mentioned, Phil Tippett, Ray Harryhausen was his mentor. He loved that stuff. He used stop motion in, I believe, all 3 of the films at one point or another.
In fact, I mentioned that I got flashbacks to other Star Wars movies. Besides the ones that you mentioned, obviously episode 3 when Shiva gets the 6 swords out of her hands, which by the way was done with cardboard. That's just crazy for me to think that was done with cardboard. Obviously that feels like that was referenced in episode 3 with General Grievous, where he whips out all the lightsaber. He lifts out extra arms that are all filled with lightsabers. And then I felt like when they threw Caroline Munro, the Margiana, because that's actually, I thought it was Mariana, it's Margiana. They throw her into the pit before the Cyclops Centaur comes together. It's like, oh, this is the Rancor. This is Return of the Jedi.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of this in the Star Wars films. Not a lot, but like some very obvious homages.
Oh, yeah, for sure, for sure. Now, I mentioned Rosa as the composer. Due to budget constraints, he didn't get to have a full orchestra. But Harryhausen really admired his work since The Thief of Baghdad. And that's why he wanted him on this movie. He had wanted to work with him before, but he ended up going with a different guy. And then that guy worked with him. I can't remember his name. It's the guy who did Jason and the Argonauts, and I believe Seventh Voyage of Sinbad. And he worked with him on several movies instead of Rosa. Now he gets Rosa for this one. But if you want to know the total budget, at least production budget. Now, I looked at a different source that gave a much higher budget than this, but I'm guessing that's the overall budget once you factor in marketing and things like that. Because the overall budget that I saw was $2 million. But according to Harryhausen, in terms of just raw cost for production, the movie cost, and he had the exact number in here, $982,351.
Yeah, I heard that the amount put in to production was roughly $1 million.
Yeah.
So that seems about right.
Yeah. That's basically all my notes for the pre-production. I do have a funny little, if you want me to bring it up, Harryhausen mentioned, how well it did both critically and financially. It was a big hit. And he did mention some of the reviews that the film got, including his favorite one. If you want me to mention that before.
Let's bring that up at the end.
Okay. We'll bring that up at the end. So let's talk about this movie itself.
Yeah, so I mean, it starts off with straight up credits. Like there is no stinger. It's just we get the credits, which I thought was interesting, but it kind of makes sense.
That should be noted. This is the first time that Dynamation, which was what Harryhausen branded his style of special effects, it was renamed Dynarama in this. There you go.
Right. And then we start off, like the film starts up with an establishing shot of the boat and Sinbad and the sailors interacting with each other, which this is where we first see the homunculus. Which
I did not realize what that was. We get Harryhausen effects very quickly in this film.
Yeah.
But it's pretty subtle. I actually thought it was a rock, a bird creature, because I know he's done those before, and that is connected to this Middle Eastern folklore, but it's not. It ends up being the homunculus.
Now, I do want to bring up a couple of things that kind of put me... If I'm going to be honest, this opening is kind of janky and not the greatest.
When the when the visions start?
No, I'm talking about in general. The film, and this is just an issue throughout the entirety of the film. The sound design in this movie is god awful. The ADR is obvious when it's ADR, which ADR, for anybody who doesn't know film, so that's where you shoot the film. And then in post-production, you have the actors come back in and they say their lines and they loop it until it sounds right. And they're dubbing their own films. Now, this film does have a couple actors that end up getting dubbed over by other people.
Yeah.
2 of them specifically. But throughout the entirety of this film, every actor has ADR. And it's really jarring. It's not well mixed in with the rest of the sounds. It's very overpowering. It sounds like they're talking into a microphone. It's not the best. And there's also moments throughout the film where they jump from really echoey, like they're talking in a cave, to they're right up on their microphone and you can hear clear as day, like they're doing ASMR videos. And it's really lacking in those regards. And then, and I find it funny. I imagine Harryhausen had something to do with this since he worked on the editing side of the film. The editing in this opening is atrocious.
It's not the strongest opening, I have to admit.
Jumpy.
It felt jumpy. It felt like it was a little bit in a rush. Like the introduction we get to Sinbad doesn't really have much fanfare or anything. It's just, it's like, hey, look, he comes out of the captain's cabin. That's basically all that happens. Like, hey, it's Sinbad.
And I just found the editing to be kind of flat. Like, it just felt like, okay, establishing shot, close up, medium shot, close up, low angle shot looking at bird, close up, close up, close up, low angle shot, close up. And it was just, it's very repetitive. It's very bland. It's very flat. And it kind of took me out right away. I think this is easily one of his weakest openings. There's no yeeting. There's no like entertainment value. It's just kind of bland.
Yeah, I will agree with you there, because when it started, I'm just like, this opening's not quite working for me. It's just not quite working for me. I think it improved. It definitely improves going forward, but it's not a great start.
Right. Now, I will say, following this, we do get, during this opening, we get a composite shot with a unknown woman dancing after Sinbad picks up the charm, the medal, whatever you want to call it at this point in time in the film's chronological order. And he gets horny, I guess. Yeah. So then he's like, I'm going to keep it. I'm going to keep this.
It was once you got to that part with, I called it the Phantom Lady when I wrote it in there. I was just like, what is going on? Okay. It's a little strange, and it's still never really fully explained later, because it's not like she has an interesting marking, a tattoo. It looks like an eye on her right hand, and I'm like, okay, that's going to be important later. I thought that was to indicate that she was a sorceress or something like that. I guess because I'm thinking of Eye of the Tiger, because our villain in that one was a sorceress, and it ends up not being anything like that at all.
Well, I would say it's a hint to where they need to go, because the whole thing about the film. The whole thing about the film and its plot MacGuffin, the piece, the metal, the cylinder, is a device to take the person who is destined to go to this special place to become the king of this land. So it has in of itself some magical powers, and the whole film is set up that you have a destiny. And I don't necessarily like this concept, but the idea of your destiny is laid out, and when your calling is there, you must follow your destiny. So Sinbad gets this charm. His calling is to go to this land, to meet this person, to figure out the chart, and destiny just so happens to get him to meet the people in his visions and lead him to the fountain of destiny.
Yeah, they bring up, it's something, basically a prophecy, and one of the issues you run into is once you introduce a prophecy into a story, it potentially boxes you in because you have to fulfill the prophecy, unless you keep the prophecy vague enough that you can play around with some stuff. Otherwise, this is most definitely the call to adventure from the classic hero's journey here. It's a very obvious example of it. It's a literal calling. It's like, hey, you come and you have to go do this, 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 and this in order to accomplish this goal. Basically the whole movie gets, in one form or another, gets laid out for you right there at the beginning.
And that is, I think, the biggest downfall, is it does kind of box itself in to this, like, this is the story. Now, granted, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because all that really does is it establishes the story. It doesn't. It's an easy concept. It's an easy story that has an obvious beginning, an obvious middle, an obvious end. Follows the hero's journey, and it works. It doesn't veer off from this story because everything falls in line with what the story is. The one thing that alters its course is the antagonist, the villain, the one that is trying to alter the course of our heroes.
Right.
So it ends up working out, and it's a pretty linear story that doesn't have, thankfully, this film does not have moments where it's like, what are we waiting for? It knows what it's doing, and it almost has a 2-hour runtime, so that's pretty good. That means it knew its pacing. It didn't stop. It kept moving, and they do a great job at moving from set piece to set piece to set piece.
Yeah. Again, like we said at the earlier, Harryhausen rejected some story outlines because he thought they were too complex. He wanted to keep it simple.
Yeah, and I think this film fully accomplishes the idea of simplicity.
Mm-hmm. And then next up, looking at my own notes. I felt like at this point, kind of early on, after we get this calling, and then the dream, and and we get that really bizarre dream sequence where we get both Margiana and we get Kura in it as well, making appearances. I called it in my notes Phantom Lady and Bat Sultan. It's really strange. I guess the implication is that it's Kura kind of messing with him a little bit, or it's Allah or whatever.
I always took it as like Allah, or like it's another like a higher power. Yeah. Because one thing that this film very obviously makes obvious is our villain is not the most powerful person. That's why he's trying to find this fountain of destiny, because he wants to become that person.
Yeah. Now he is formidable, but there is a heavy cost with what makes him formidable, which we will get into. But I also felt like this is just me kind of reading into it. I felt like for a little while after that, after we're introduced to him for 30 seconds, and then the weird stuff starts happening, this Sinbad seemed a little bit weirdly obsessive for about 10 minutes, and then it tapers off, and no one thought it was strange. And I thought that was going to be something that was going to be factored in there. It's like, hey, why is he so set on doing whatever it is that we're doing right now? But that never really gets brought up. And then after he meets the Vizier, that kind of goes away. That characterization.
Yeah, that part of me wonders if that is maybe him locking into his journey, because the film does very well establish, and I want to get into this later when it is verbally established in the film, that Sinbad doesn't like the idea of being held down. Mm-hmm. He likes the idea of being free to sail the oceans and do what he wants. Mm-hmm. Oddly enough, his entire crew is 100% down with that. Like, there's never any attempt to like go against what he wants, which, I mean, par for the course at the times. The idea of like mutiny against the captain wasn't really an interesting concept to cover in films. In modern films, they would absolutely have like a subplot with one of the crewmates trying to take over and whatever, but for this film, I think a lot of it comes down to is Sinbad and his crew just kind of sail the seas until they catch wind of their next journey, their next adventure. And so they don't really, I agree, it's a little jarring because he's like all like starry-eyed and everything, and then it's fine. Perhaps that's just what happens when he gets wind of his next adventure.
I guess.
It's like when I go to a store and find a Godzilla figure, I get starry-eyed and all.
Kinda. I did read the original, the 7 Voyages of Sinbad story from Arabian Nights, which I will talk about a little bit once we finish talking about the movie. And I did read that, and there's a little bit of that kind of an air too. Sinbad in those original stories had quite a case of wanderlust. He's just like, I have to go on a voyage and do things, and then crazy stuff would happen. Which, like I said, we'll talk a little bit about that. But so he's off and he's doing that. They come to land, and then we get introduced to our villain, Tom Baker. And like I said, it took me a few minutes to recognize him. And we establish him as a character pretty quickly. Not so much the supernatural aspects of him, that comes a little bit later, but we are shown that he is a proficient sword fighter and things like that. And, you know, he's he's definitely authoritative. And he quickly recognizes the Sinbad as an issue because he has part of the amulet.
Right. And I think a lot of it too, and I don't think it would be because the man with the golden mask, as I'm going to call him, he could identify that Sinbad was like the chosen one, the person that is destined to be here right away.
Yeah, he conveniently knows all of, knows the prophecy and read the script.
But I would venture to guess that's why our main antagonist also knows that. There's just something about Sinbad. You know, when you meet somebody you know is like talented or is a good person, like you just get that vibe, you know, that you get the vibe, you get their vibe check and it works, right? And so I think partially why he automatically is like, this guy's a bad juju for me is simply the fact that he can tell whether that be his magic or just the feeling, or if he knows like what the destiny is supposed to be, he knows that Sinbad is bad news for him. And I think that that's a nice inclusion, you know, that feeling of, oh, this is somebody important, you know, it's the whole thing that Star Wars covers with Anakin, you know, you were the chosen one, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And so we have a nice little horseback chase here, and the Sinbad ends up in the palace of the vizier. And we also get to see the Kura actually use some of his supernatural power by getting a gate to close. And then we're introduced to the vizier, and I was a big fan of this character as soon as we met him. I'm a little bit of a sucker for characters who wear masks, particularly when we've got a full face mask where you can't see. We could see a little bit of his mouth, and we could see his eyes. So it's not like V from V for Vendetta, where it's completely covered. All of his features are completely covered up. So we can see a little bit of emoting, but the actor playing our vizier here, I gotta give him mad props, because the guy is basically doing this entire performance with body language and his voice. And I honestly found myself wishing, it's like, you know what? I hope we never see his face. Like, I was seriously like, please never show his face. I want him to remain this mysterious character, throughout the whole thing. We do see his face later, much later in the film, but we only see it briefly once before his magical restoration at the end. But because too often, if you have a masked character, because either because no one wants to commit to it, or because the actors are a little vain and they have a clause in their contract that says, hey, I have to have at least my face on screen some of the time. That's why it became a little bit of a joke with some of these superhero movies, most notably some of the Spider-Man movies, where Spider-Man just could not keep that mask on for the life of him, or it would get destroyed during a fight or whatever. It's because the actors are like, I have to have my face on screen at least some of the time. So, like I said, it's a little bit of a joke. But then you have exceptions to that, like Carl Urban with Dredd, where he committed to the mask. It's like, I'm not taking it off. I'm keeping it on the entire time, because that's who this character is.
Right. For me, I was really disappointed when they didn't keep his face a mystery. I thought that could have been something really brilliant and something really mystical, not including his face. And the way they kind of do it, I felt like was a little cheap. It almost doesn't feel necessary. Like, you could have done anything to distract the natives that wouldn't have been, take your mask off, put your mask back on, jump in the basket.
Yeah. I see what they were going for, but it didn't seem like the most necessary thing, like you were saying. I don't know. I wasn't the biggest fan of it. I almost would have preferred never seeing his face until the magical restoration. But
Yeah.
But up until then, he's such a cool character. We get his whole backstory here, how he was the advisor to the king, but then the king died, and then he basically got the throne when he wasn't expecting to get the throne. And then his face got burned by a fireball because he was trying to figure out all the stuff with the amulet. Like, we get this big info dump here, and it's handled very nicely, I felt like, because it's filling in Sinbad, who doesn't know what exactly is going on. He just know weird things are happening. And for that moment, Sinbad is the audience. We're learning this with him. Right. And, we really get to see the sets where they're doing this, and they're very, really nice sets and some really nice location filmmaking here.
And there's some good lighting in this scene.
Oh,
the scene has very nice lighting.
Yeah, because when we get to the scene where they're trying to, it's in a building a little underground, and they're trying to figure some things out, and it's a really nice room, and we get all of this exposition, and then there's like, well, okay, we've got two pieces of it. Where's the third one? What are we going to do? And then Sinbad figures out that, it's basically a map, and he holds it up to, was it a candle? I think it was a candle.
I think, or it's in the middle of the room. It's like this fire pit.
Yeah.
Tiny fire
it was a fire pit. And then he holds it up in the right position, and then the shadow gets cast up onto the wall where there's basically a map. And he's like, yeah, that's telling us where we need to go. And we find out that to find the Fountain of Destiny, if you have the three pieces here, you get a different, we'll say, power up or whatever, by putting this into the Fountain of Destiny. Like, one gives you eternal youth, I think it's basically eternal youth. One gives you a shield of darkness, and then the other one gives you a crown.
It's a crown of riches unknown to this world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Basically, you get all three of these things in there into this fountain, you're going to be set for life. Hence why all of our characters now want it.
I don't know if they all want it, but that is the end goal of our protagonists, is to locate this.
Yeah. Because
it's Sinbad's destiny. It's the destiny of our characters to find this and to take it.
Yeah. And during this scene is when the Harryhausen effects come back, because the homunculus is being Laserbeak before Laserbeak, spying on them, and I guess Kura can see through the homunculus's eyes, so he gets all of this stuff too.
I took it as hearing, he can hear it, but essentially he's the eyes and ears to eavesdrop, which is a very interesting and clever way of having our villain always know what's going on during the story.
Yeah, because that ends up being something that gets used a lot in this. Like I said, that's why I said, like, he's Laserbeak before Laserbeak and Transformers, because it seemed like there was nary an episode of the original Transformers where Laserbeak wasn't spying on Autobots as a convenient way to let the bad guys know what's going on.
But they soon find out that the homunculus was spying on them, and they go after him, only for it to explode into shredded paper.
Yeah, or dead leaves or something.
Yeah.
It's a little strange. And it's the first time where we're getting some back projection and superimposition, combining the effects with the live action. It's not the most impressive example of it in this movie, but it's still pretty decent, I would say. I would actually say the homunculus has better scenes later on.
I would agree. I would agree with that.
Now, although we have more actors trying to interact with it at this point in this one. And this is also around, especially with the Vizier, where I started really taking note of some of the lines in this. I was very impressed with the scripting in this, because there's a lot of lines that I thought, that sounds pretty good. A lot of them sound like proverbs. This was actually, this first one I wrote here was actually said by Kura, where he says, "He who searches for pearls must not sleep," when he's talking to his assistant.
There's a lot of lines in this film that are really clever and really, for the time, like it matches up. It's very, how would you say it? it's very almost Shakespearean.
In a way.
Theatrical.
Yeah.
It's kind of theatrical. And throughout this film, and this is something I appreciated, the actors are kind of acting a little theatrical. It's a little overacting, which is something commonly found in theater. But that works for these legendary tales because that's how these would be told, is through theater or through something where there was tradition. A lot of overacting. Yes. And so it adds to it a layer of fantasy.
Yeah.
That it's like, okay, these people wouldn't really act this way if this was real. But it adds to that. It's the magic of the movie.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and this is, for all intents and purposes, it's, basically a fairy tale. Like, if you look at the original Sinbad stories, it's very much has a fairy tale sort of structure to it. I wouldn't think it would technically be considered a fairy tale, but it's dangerously close to being one. But this is
definitely a tale.
For sure.
To say the least.
Yeah. And it's also during this scene that we get what's basically the line of the movie, because it comes back a couple of times. And I actually found it to be pretty profound and very in character for Sinbad, especially this version of Sinbad, where the vizier, because he invokes the name of Allah a lot and saying like, hey, we're going to do this because we're going to be blessed by Allah and Allah will be with us. And he's banking on being successful because of the blessings of Allah. And Sinbad replies to him by saying, trust in Allah, but tie up your camel. Which I took as him saying, yes, trust in God for all intents and purposes, but still make sure that you do the preparation so that you know that you can reap those blessings, so to speak.
Yeah, it really, and honestly, I think it comes down to something that even in the prophecy, in air quotes, they make very clear is, no matter what, your destiny or like whatever it is can be decided. That higher power is there, but you have the power to sway how that ends up being. It's up to the person, it's up to the mortal to follow or to not follow or to act or not act in what this higher power wants you to do, whether that be journey to this unknown land and find this fountain of youth or meet this certain person. It's up to you, the person, to actually do that, not wait for somebody, some higher power to make this happen.
Right. And because there is the expectation that if you want the blessing of the god or the gods, you still have to put effort into it. It's not just simply going to happen. Not to get too theological with that, because that's a big debate in Christian circles. Trust me, I know all about it as a Christian, where, the whole God sovereignty versus free will debate. And I tend to land in a position that says that, yes, God is sovereign, but he still expects you to do things. He does not reward laziness. So in this case, yes, trust in Allah to bring you through, but you still have to put in some sort of an effort. You have to be prepared. You must practice wisdom.
Yeah.
In order to make this happen.
And even on another layer, the person, the store merchant who appears in the following scene,
Hakim,
who barters Hakim to have his son go with him on this journey. It pays him to take his son because his son is a deadbeat who's just drinking and eating all of his food, doing nothing. He ends up having to do something. Like, he isn't given stuff. He's expected to work. He's expected to do things. And by the end of the film, he himself is working and fighting along Sinbad and joining in on this journey and being a productive individual. And funny enough, one of the last lines in the film is him saying, trust in Allah. Then he falls.
Yeah.
And then the joke is, but always tie your camel.
But always tie your camel. Yeah, that's one of the instances where it comes back. But yeah, so we'll talk about that. So we get this scene. Hakim is only here for this scene. And I thought for a minute it was a little superfluous for us, considering Harryhausen was going out of his way to simplify this. the fact that we have this character who introduces us to two other characters who, for a little while, don't seem like they do a whole lot. It almost felt superfluous. We're introduced to the eye candy, to the love interest in this. This is where Caroline Munro comes in as Morgiana. And, she's a slave girl. And then we're introduced to the son, who's basically the comic relief character. I'm almost looking at this as just like, oh, yeah, great. This is when you introduce the obnoxious high school kid, who's not really going to want to do anything until you whip him into shape. It's a bit of a tried and true trope, but, it's a tried and true trope for a reason. And it would have been easy, I think, to turn the son into just the comic relief character, but he does have an arc and he grows throughout the whole thing. So I give them credit. He's not just there to be there for jokes, but he is established as a comic character from the start.
And I appreciate that because his whole reason for being there, granted, it is, I kind of feel like this scene was shoehorned in just to introduce these two side characters.
Yeah.
But the way that they don't just, in a way, they actually make these two characters more of a central focal point than the Visor character, because for 30 minutes of this film, he kind of is just this background character that doesn't do anything until they reach land. Mm-hmm. Whereas both the son and Margarina, right?
Morgiana
don't do that. They are important parts of the story, and we see that both of them kind of get this culture shock from going from Hakim, correct? Mm-hmm. Hakim's store to the boat. And in a way, I think it's very interesting what the boat in the ocean symbolizes, which I'm going to talk about when they actually bring it up. And so I appreciated that, even though this scene specifically is literally just a plot device just to introduce these two side characters.
Yeah. There's some good moments in it. There's also the kind of hilarious line about where Hakim makes a comment about Morgiana being curvaceous, and I think, didn't he actually call her fat too, if I remember right?
No, he said she's not as fat as he likes them.
Oh yeah, which just cracked me up a little bit.
Yeah, actually, I'll bring up something that I thought was really interesting, is that this film, I'm going to use the term Marvelizes because I think Marvel has done an excellent job at popularizing the concept of quips.
Yeah. Just to let you know, there actually was a Marvel comic adaptation of this movie.
There was. Yep. There was 3 issues of Journey into Mystery, I believe, where
written by Len Wein. So,
So this film, throughout the entirety of it, and like I mentioned, the last scene ends with a quip. Mm-hmm. This film is filled with quips, something that a lot of people tend to say is a Marvelism, something that Marvel kind of did, where your characters are serious characters, but they make jokes every couple lines. Mm-hmm. While a lot of people have been very quick to say, hey, look, this was something Star Wars popularized in the original films. There's tons of moments in those films where there's quips made by the main characters. This is yet another example of pre-Star Wars where Hollywood blockbusters, like event films that were made for the audiences to go eat popcorn and enjoy, quips were just something, it's comedic, it's comedy. It's a better way to introduce and involve your audience in a way where they want to keep watching because they're enjoying what they're seeing.
Yeah, it was at a time when movie scripts were just meant to be witty. Like, because I've seen even B movies where you would think, like, you don't have to go the extra mile to make this script witty, and they make it witty. I mean, I remember bringing that up, actually, and I don't mean to demean Beast from 20,000 Fathoms by calling it a B movie, because I don't think it is a B movie. But
it's a B movie.
Yeah, but even Beast from 20,000 Fathoms has a very witty script. Even the Giant Claw has a pretty witty script. Are they the best examples of witty scripts? Probably not, but it's still there because that was just something that screenwriters did.
Science fiction and fantasy films especially often do utilize comedic and witty writing for their concepts. I mean, the whole idea of some of these films is fantastic. You know, I think that it's only fair that you have moments in these films that are meant to be funny. You know, the whole thing about a lot of these are they're B movies, and that's not a demeaning thing. That is a fact. And B movies were just the second billing. They were the second billing. Godzilla has historically been a B movie for most of its entirety, but those B movies are popcorn films. They're meant to be comedic. I just went and saw a movie that is very comedic. Bad Boys, Ride or Die. My whole theater was laughing every time that I watched. Like every other line was a joke. People like comedy. Comedy is something that gets people engaged because they want to laugh, especially because the whole concept of film is its escapism. You're going to another world. You're going into that silver screen to another world to live a different life, which is fine. Escapism is perfectly fine in proper doses. I cover that, and I know you cover that in your All Monsters Attack episode. Go listen to both of those.
Yeah, I was going to say, because we had some accidental synergy there for a while.
So, for films, comedy is something that people will enjoy. And if they can get a laugh out of their day, whether they just got off work and it's been a rough day and they go see a movie and, hey, there's a funny line, or, hey, Will Smith does something stupid, and you can laugh.
Does it involve slapping? I'm sorry.
You know, I don't think he slapped in Bad Boys Ride or Die. Spoiler alert. But no, I had a teacher in 7th grade. His whole thing was every day he said that no matter what, everybody should shed a tear of joy and laughter every day. No matter what's going on in your day, you should at least laugh. And his goal was to get you to laugh to a point where you would be crying with how much laughter you had.
Oh, yeah.
And I think comedy is something that everybody enjoys to some degree. You know, on my show, I'm going to speak for myself, but I know you kind of have a similar thing here. You know, there's comedic beats throughout it. Like, there's always going to be banter. There's going to be back and forth. That's the personalities. The personalities you guys are listening to have those comedic beats, which for some people, they come for the comedy. You know, they come for those personalities, and they stay for the information or the opinions, whether they be right or wrong. As long as it's entertaining, that's what matters.
Yeah.
And
I would tell people the two most important things you want in a podcast is that, particularly if it's, you know, discussion based ones like these, whether it's politics, movies, or whatever, is you need to have good material and charismatic hosts. If you got those, you can carry anything.
And I think that leads us back to the Golden Voyage of Sinbad, where there's a lot of charisma from our characters, whether it be the antagonist, the protagonist, or our side characters. There's a ton of memorable moments that these characters have. And I love the fact that they go out of their way to not kill any of Sinbad's men. None of them die. They all survive. And that's because they want you to feel like all of these characters matter. And that is something I really appreciate about the film.
Yeah, because in the next film, Eye of the Tiger, they some of them become cannon fodder for some of the monsters,
But even in the fight with the goddess with 6 arms, all of the people that go to help Sinbad make it. Yeah. Not a single one of them dies. They get hurt. They get hurt, but they don't die. And I love that. The only person that dies in this, spoiler alert, but I mean, if you're watching this, you should have already seen the movie, is the villain.
Yeah, correct.
It ends with the heroes, the good, surviving and winning, and the evil dying, which is a very fantastic idea, of course, that good will always triumph over evil no matter what. But it's very nice to see that they go all in. Everybody survives. Everybody is a hero, and those heroes survive.
Yeah, and to go back to where we were in the progressing through the film. So I would like to point out that Hakim's son looks like a miniature Andre the Giant, especially with
I was thinking
hair.
Bruno Mars.
Oh, Bruno Mars, that works too. But anyway, so now we're on the ship and we're beginning the journey. The vizier comes, much to the surprise of everybody. There's even a line from one of the crew members. They're talking about these crew members. Even he has a memorable line where he says something like, "I've heard of gold going to a man's head, but Yeah,
and that's where I noticed the witty comedy first, was that moment specifically. Yeah. And it's also interesting to note that the Golden Voyage, in air quotes, doesn't start until 27 minutes into the film, which is about a fifth of the way through the film, if I'm thinking correctly, because it's about 2 hours.
It's about an hour and 50 minutes.
I think it's closer to 45. I think it's an hour and 44.
Hour and 45, hour and 50. Yeah. Yeah. And then, so we get some stuff going on where we get the voyage underway. And, although there was kind of a superfluous scene when I just remember when Sinbad was off talking to the vizier, where the crew members had a dancing girl. And they were like, "Oh, look at this!" And then then she went away. And I'm like, "What was the point of that scene?" Well, to my surprise, none of his crew members are flipping out over Margiana being there wearing a costume that even Ray Harryhausen said in his books, like, "Yeah, no one was used to seeing costumes like that in movies."
Right? Yeah.
They just weren't used to. It was a little sexier than most people would have been used to, which is funny because if you watch the original Star Trek, which was from the mid to late 60s, they were doing even more outrageous, sexy outfits on some of the ladies. So I don't know. But maybe that's because Star Trek was ahead of its time. But
now, because they're embarking on their journey now, and we get established to like the son having to work on the ship, and they establish it's going to be a 2 to 3 year voyage, which they do a great job at kind of zooming through all of that. One of the things I appreciate is establishing what I think is a very good theme that kind of says about the times that they were living in, especially the decade they were living in. So at night, Sinbad goes into his quarters where Margiana,
yes,
did I say okay, is there waiting for him. And in there, she's like, "Well, you own me now." And he says, "No, you're a free person." Yep. There's every human being is free.
Yep.
And I thought that was so clever because this is following the 1960s, which was peak civil rights movement. So this is yet another repercussion of those events that is pushing the thought process of everybody is free. Everyone is equal. It doesn't matter your race, gender, or who you are, what you identify as. You are equal, which I love that. And when you think about it, in the 1970s, there was a huge push for peace and love. Mm-hmm. And the thought process of everybody should love each other. Mm-hmm. And I mean, granted, this film takes that to a romantic level, but just on a level of humanity, I love the fact that Sinbad makes it very clear that she can do what she wants. And in a way, for Sinbad, the ocean represents that freedom of man to, and it kind of very Star Trek-y, to explore the world, and you don't have to worry about who you are, what you identify as, because you can be free to do what you want.
Right, which actually does go back to the original stories, because those original Sinbad stories were being told at a time when there was, it was the, I can't remember the name of it. I'll share that a little bit later, when there was a lot of exploration going on with the Arabic empires. So there's this there's this sense of exploration of finding all of these strange and exotic places. But because we're looking at this, because the reason Margiana is here is because Sinbad does technically, because it's love at first sight. He sees her and he's like, "Oh, wow, she's great." And Hakim is just very happy to just sell the slave girl to him without much objection. So he buys her. It's interesting. He's buying her, but he's buying her freedom. basically.
Yeah.
He's not buying her to keep her. He's buying her to free her because he's in love with her. And he tells her this. It can come across as a little bit anachronistic in this day and age, but I think we take this sort of for granted. Like you said, this is at a very early point where that idea is starting to take hold, and we take it a little for granted here, and nowadays. But it does make Sinbad more of I guess you could say, a traditional hero in that regard. And the interesting thing is, he tells her this, and she's still willing to do things for him, which is what's really fascinating. Because he said, you're free. You can do what you want. And she says, well, what I want to do is take care of you, basically. So she still chooses to, quote unquote, serve him in freedom, which is really interesting.
Right. And, I think especially one of the things that really makes it important is, even at this point, even though we had the civil rights movement on race, gender is still something that saw a major gap of like what is expected from each side, the gender norms in air quotes. Mm-hmm. And here Sinbad goes against any of those and lets her do what she wants. He does talk about and say that she does a great job cleaning and whatnot. But he also, like you said, he asks for things and she does them. He doesn't tell her to do things. It's her free will, whether she wants to do that or not. And she's the only character outside of the visor that doesn't have to do work. Mm-hmm. They're not expected to do anything. They're treated as royalty. They're treated as a guest, not a crew member. And something that I love about the crew members is we do get the establishment, before they set sail, the crew members have a show going on with a girl dancing for them. But when our side character comes on, she is not sexualized. She's wearing clothing that very obviously is doing
because she's a slave girl.
But nobody, there's those looks, but nothing is said, nothing is done. Nobody tries to violate that. Mm-hmm. She is respected no matter what. And I think that's a very important moment, is the fact that they are respecting her and she is treated as an equal or as a guest, as somebody who is above them. And I love that. I think that's a great inclusion here.
Mm-hmm. Sinbad even goes into his room and basically shuts the door, not wanting her. Probably does, but he's not making
He doesn't invite her.
He doesn't invite her. He goes into his chamber and, does his thing.
And she even says, are you going to be sleeping in here? And he says, yes. Mm-hmm. Like, making it very clear, she has most of the space. She has her space, and then he'll take his space. Mm-hmm. And I think that's great. And I think that's a great way to paint Sinbad as this very righteous individual, somebody who believes in equality and believes in freedom in a story that is also kind of like, your destiny is made out for you. Mm-hmm. The idea, because those two concepts kind of contradict each other. The idea of your destiny is set and I have free will. I can do what I want.
Yeah, that is an interesting point. Yeah. Where you would think that if it is all that set, then you don't really have a lot of freedom, even though our characters are all about freedom. But now we got to move on to I would say probably the first really impressive special effects sequence we have in the film, which is when Kura, who's following Sinbad, which made me think of last year when we watched Eye of the Tiger, where we also have a villain trying to chase down our heroes. In a lot of ways, Kura is basically the better version of the sorceress character from Eye of the Tiger, mm-hmm. which is, I guess, technically means she's the inferior version of this character. But anyway, Chase trying to chase him down, and he needs to get the chart to know where they're going because he wants to get there first. So he invokes the dark demons as he starts playing, because this is when we find out that he has incredible supernatural power, but there's a lofty price for it. So he invokes the dark demons, and he makes the masthead, the figurehead on the ship, come to life to get him the chart and also start attacking some of the crew members. And you mentioned that most everybody in the crew survives. We do have at least one potential casualty here because the figurehead does try to strangle a guy and then throw him overboard.
That's true, but we never see if he actually died or not.
No, he does scream. He does scream when he goes over. So it's possible that they got him back.
An interesting thing I want to bring up, I criticize the sound design for this film. One thing I do appreciate, and they also did this in Jason and the Argonauts with the giant metal statue, where every time he moved, he creaked.
Yes, I'm gonna remember his. Keep going.
But here we have the masked lady who creaks of wood every time she moves.
Yeah, I want to say the sound design for the stop motion creatures, I think, is pretty brilliant.
I will say this: it's not very well mixed. The sound design's good here, but the sound mixing is not. It's very ASMR, but I love it when they have like specific sounds that really stand out. Mm-hmm. That's something like one of my favorite Japanese films, Quint, does that with creaking wood in the long black Talos. Thank you. In Quint, the opening segment, the long black hair has creaking wood all throughout, and it's very obvious. Like, it sounds like the microphone's right up on the creaking wood. I even called back to that in my short film SOS Seek Shelter, where I used creaking wood floors to symbolize the house that this character was in was shaking and creaking, and I made those sounds very loud because I love that. That is something that it's not the best in sound mixing terms, but it just adds a whole nother layer to the horror to me of how close this sound is. And when you have the context of this is not a good sound, like in Quite On, it's this house is slowly falling apart as our main character in the short is running for his life. It's like, oh no, like this is caving in on him. For my film Seek Shelter, it was, oh, the monster's on the house. It's right there. For here, it's this monster, this god. I don't know what they would think of it as in terms of the canon.
I don't know. Well, like it was called a siren, but that's by the publicity.
Siren in air quotes.
Yeah.
Is right here. It's in front of us. It's alive. Mm-hmm. I think that is a brilliant way to have the characters on screen.
And what really impressed me with this is that, and you get this with some of the other ones, is that since these are not, I mean, they're puppets, and sometimes when you do stop motion, you can get into some weird jerky movements depending on how many frames you have to indicate speed and all that. But I think Harryhausen might have leaned into the fact that these are stop motion puppets because the figurehead in particular moves kind of stiffly because it's wood.
I always took it as like it's wood, so that's why it's moving stiffly. And the deity at the end is made out of metal.
Yeah.
So it's a little more janky with how it moves, and it's a little more robotic.
Yeah. But so we have the figurehead here. It's with the creaking wood and everything, and its interactions with the characters are pretty impressive. It also. And I think they did some rear projection to make this work. There's a point where it smashes the cabin to get to the chart. And that is actually integrated really well. Like that is it's clearly two different shots. They had a prop on set that they wrecked, and then Harryhausen animated this puppet over on top of it. And it looks dang good. And what's funny is I bring that up because we have a shot when the figurehead is actually getting the chart, and it's not the puppet anymore. It is actually a gloved hand, and it sticks out as an obvious gloved hand. And I'm thinking to myself, you know what? You know, Harryhausen's doing a good job when that puppet looks way better than this gloved hand that they had to do as an insert.
Yeah, and there's a couple shots in this film where they utilize a practical, like, glove or miniature or something. It's blink and you'll miss it moments, but when they are used, I feel like they look pretty good. And it's mostly to interact with real things. The homunculus throughout the film does have an actual puppet they use that actually moves to interact directly with our villain.
There's a scene where he remakes it, and that's the part that's definitely inspired by the birth of the Emir. And that's probably that I think is probably the best scene of the homunculus right there, especially with Tom Baker acting toward it. Like his the way he acts, which basically he's acting toward nothing. He does a superb job with that. I know some people criticize actors who are acting to nothing when they're doing special effects. I've heard some actors who complain about having to do that, but I try to remember who it was. But I think it was a British actor who actually said that he actually thinks that doing that, acting toward nothing, that you have to imagine because it's going to get added in later by special effects. He said that is actually the pinnacle of acting because you really have to imagine as something is there and then figure out how you are going to interact with that.
Right. Yeah. And so I have a little bit of trained acting experience. So the way you start is with monologues, which are all it is just you and you're acting towards the audience. So the thing about monologues is you have to envision all of it happening and you're acting towards this audience. You can't interact with the audience itself unless that's the piece you're doing. You have to act like what's in front of you is there. The basis of acting is acting with nothing. That is how you train yourself to act with physical things. When you do a script read, you're reading the lines, you're voice acting, pretending like you're in that situation, in that spot, doing that thing. So I don't necessarily agree with the thought process of, oh, I'm standing in, pajamas with little spots all over me, or I'm standing in this green room and I'm not really acting because I can't interact with stuff. I think at its base level, that is the most extreme acting you can do when we're talking about generic acting. There's more intense stuff like kabuki and whatnot, but I'm not getting into all that. It is something that as an actor, if you can pretend, acting is pretending, right? Mm-hmm. If you can properly pretend that what is in front of you is real when there is nothing there, you have achieved acting to its fullest because you are acting with nothing.
Yeah.
You are creating a world in your head and acting based off of that, which is the highest point of creativity you can truly have.
Right. But to get back to the movie, so we get all this, it's a long and elaborate sequence that obviously, as we established earlier, Harryhausen wanted, because it's such a great idea, the masthead comes to life. We're putting an anachronistic figurehead into this thing, into this movie in order to do this. Well, he does give it plot significance because the figurehead does get the chart, and then Kura tells the thing to jump into the water and return to him, which does succeed with much effort. And when the crew's like, well, we lost the chart, what are we going to do? And Sinbad's basically says, well, it's a good thing I already set the course, and so we're just going to stick to what we're doing.
And he also makes it very clear that he knows what to do because it's all in his head, which I think furthermore cements the concept of this is his destiny. He's the man for this. That's why our character advisor earlier on was like, you are the chosen one. You are the one to do this because you are who you are. Sinbad is the sailor of the seven seas.
For sure. So we get all of that. We get all of that out of the way. And this is also when we learn that, yes, Kura is powerful, but there's a major, major drawback. And I think it's only specifically when he, quote unquote, communes with the dark demons, because we see him do other supernatural things and it doesn't seem to do that to him. So if he goes this far, the implication being that he is tapping into demonic powers, which should never be done. It is extremely forbidden. By doing that, it ages him more quickly. or rather, it said basically it saps his strength and it makes him, and the physical manifestation of that is that he ages more quickly. So we actually end up seeing Tom Baker at several different ages throughout the film, because they represent that by putting bags under his eyes, making his skin look a little more wrinkly. His facial hair gets longer and changes color. And so we see it wearing down on him. So then when we get to the end of the movie, when he gets to the fountain and his youth and strength are restored, he's suddenly an even bigger threat.
Right. But I think the fact that he has in of himself a problem, the fact that he can't overdo it, and it's this thought process that a lot of villains have, which is if you go too far, you're going to cause your own doom, which various characters do. I mean, we've already talked about Star Wars plenty. To bring it up, the Sith Lord. He pushes Darth Vader so far and tries to push Luke so far that his ultimate demise is Darth Vader tossing him down, and then they retcon that and da-da-da-da-da, Disney Star Wars.
If Jimmy was here, he would have opinions.
But what I really love is our villain gets what he wants. They do pull a Thanos. He gets his youth back, and he becomes an even bigger threat for our characters to fight. I think it's so good that he has his own stakes and he has his own narrative, and he achieves that narrative, which creates a bigger problem that you can do all in one film and not have to split it up into 2.5 to 3 hour long films with 60 characters. Sorry.
I'm sorry, what was that? Anyway, but I want to bring this up because I was thinking about this while I was watching the movie. We've been drawing a lot of comparisons between Kura and what we get later with the Sorceress and Eye of the Tiger. And I know you and I talked about how as Eye of the Tiger went on, we started taking the villain less seriously. The villain was just not presenting as much of a threat because she was so undermining herself so early in the movie that it was hard to take her seriously. The question we've already said that, well, Kura is the better version of that. Do you think the same thing happens to Kura, or is it even when he is undermining himself because he gets his youth back at the end, does that make it worth it, or is he still able to carry a reasonable threat level despite his own hubris getting in the way?
Yeah, I really think that they do a great job at writing him, because throughout all of this film, he is a threat. He chases down Sinbad at the beginning of the film. He's chasing them down in the sea. Eventually, he uses magic to get the charts. Now he has the charts. He knows where he's going. And then once they make landfall, he actually directly impacts their journey and stops them and prevents them from going forward, which gets him ahead, which in of itself is really nice to see. And then he uses and manipulates the natives to do his own work, which is, again, a great job. He is a threat.
Yeah, I mean, depending on how you look at it, he commands a god.
He uses his power to turn the natives into thinking that he is above their god. And I think that's a great narrative. I think that's a great usage of his power.
He was physically weak at that time, but he was still mentally sharp. He's charismatic. He's clever.
Yes. And so by the end of the film, he achieves what he wants. And even then, he's still clever. He still finds a way to turn the tides on the monsters fighting. He still gives, you can see in the actor's eyes for Sinbad, he's nervous about this final fight when he turns invisible. And the fact that at the very end, the only thing that gives Sinbad the upper hand is the brief moments, the momentary lapse of reason that he has when he realizes he has gotten what he wants. That is when Sinbad, who is equally as clever, and they establish that in the film, that he is very clever and he knows what he's doing, can strike him down when he needs to.
Mm-hmm.
He only needed a few seconds to find that moment to win the day. And he did that, which complements both of their intelligence. I almost would say that the villain losing wasn't even that bad of a thing because it was a very brief moment.
Mm-hmm.
And Sinbad, who was proven to be intelligent when he was, going up against the god, the deity, the centaur, the natives, the wooden statue, he quickly was like, get fire, like, let's fight it with fire. It's wood. We can fight it that way. The fact that he's like boom, 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 like he can on a dime, like figure out and problem solve it. It adds like he's the captain of the ship. As a manager, as a captain, as a leader, you have to be able to make quick problem solving decisions. I think it all just complements his ability to adapt to any situation he's in, because that's what Sinbad did in all of his journeys, is adapting to the situation provided to him at that given moment.
Yeah, for sure. I also think that it helps that you have such a strong, charismatic actor in the role as Tom Baker, because he embodies this character so well. Even when Kura is physically weak, Tom Baker is commanding the room. He is selling the strength of the character, even at his weakest moments, which is one of the reasons why Tom Baker is just an amazing actor. So, and then, like I said, we get the scene with the homunculus again, and this was a moment where I'm like, man, Harryhausen's wing effects are just gold. They're so good in this, because that's where a lot of the expression for the homunculus comes from, is the wings. And then we finally get to Lemuria, and which is our destination here, where the Fountain of Destiny or Fountain of Youth, whatever is. So just to explain to people, because I've heard the term Lemuria before, I did look up a couple of quick notes about Lemuria. And it is something that's been around for a while. It was basically a lost continent that was proposed in 1864 by a zoologist. There's a reason for that, named Philip Sclater. And it was theorized to have sunk in the Indian Ocean. There was another scholar who wrote about this around the same time, who actually referred to it as the continent of Mu, which, if you're Tokusatsu fans, particularly Toho Tokusatsu fans, that's a little amusing. And it has since been, I'm not going to get into too much detail about it, but it has since been appropriated by occultists and by some as the origin point of the human race. But the theory of Lemuria has since been discredited because of the discovery of plate tectonics and continental drift in the 20th century. And the reason why it's called Lemuria is because of lemurs, the animal that, yeah. It was proposed as an explanation for why there were lemur fossils in Madagascar and the Indian subcontinent, but not in continental Africa or the Middle East. A biologist by the name of Ernst Haeckel, I hope I said that right, suggested in 1870 that Lemuria could be, he was the one who suggested it could be the ancestral home of humans. This hypothesis and caused this hypothesis to move beyond the scope of geology and zoogeography. I hope I said that right, which is what made this whole concept, this whole framework popular, outside of the scientific community. But then, like I said, by the 20th century, because of plate tectonics, no one really bought into it anymore. So Lemuria, in a lot of ways, is kind of like Atlantis or Mu, but it's definitely a newer version of that. Because Atlantis goes all the way back to ancient Greece, and Mu has been around for a while as well. I've done some research on Atlantis. Go listen to my Guardian of the Galaxy episode to learn more.
Guardian
about
of the
that.
Galaxy?
Excuse me.
You covered Guardians of the Galaxy?
Gamera Guardian of the Galaxy.
I would love to see that.
Gamera Guardian of the Galaxy. Sorry.
I want to know
the Guardian of the Universe.
MIMP...
See, I'm screwing myself up here. This is too bad. See, you're being Jimmy right now. You're correcting me.
Plot twist. I've always been Jimmy.
What? You think
dun dun dun?
Yeah, you think I would have figured that out by now? But anyway, So we get to Lemuria, and we've got our characters, Sinbad and the crew, trying to infiltrate things, and Kura's right behind them. And then we get into some shenanigans. Yep, we have Kura causing a cave-in for this temple where they go in. I'm trying to remember. Is that when they meet the? No, that's a little bit later.
Oracle of all knowledge.
Yeah, that's when they meet the Oracle. They do meet the Oracle there, and there's a guardian there who I think I read in Ray Harryhausen's book that he said for years people thought that the hooded figure by the pool where they contact the Oracle was actually his wife, and he actually said no, it wasn't.
I love this sequence. Simply, I love the prosthetics used on the Oracle of all knowledge. I think it looks really effective.
It does,
and it's very mythological with how like these fiery flames come up and this face appears. It's very kind of Wizard of Ozzy.
I thought that too. I thought that I actually put in my notes like Wizard of Oz, is that you or something like
with the wizard. Yeah. And I love moments like this. It's really, it's very fantastic and very based in that like mythology.
I actually thought of Shakespeare when I saw this because they talk to this hooded figure that is implied to, even though you don't really see the face, definitely implied to be this old woman. And then, where they contact, it looks like a pool. And it reminded me of the opening of Macbeth with the Weird Sisters or the Wayward Sister, whichever term that you prefer, where they famously say, bubble, bubble, toil and trouble. And that's when Macbeth comes and they prophesy over him and tell him, this is your destiny. Now, it was a very negative destiny, but prophecy spoken over them. So we get another oracle giving forth another prophecy. It's kind of, characters even remarks like, why is he speaking in riddles? There's a comment about that. So we get all of this stuff to move the story forward. And then Kura causes a cave in. He makes the entire, and it's a miniature. It's a nice miniature. There's not a lot of quote unquote miniatures like we would understand miniatures as tokusatsu fans, but this is one of them. And he uses his supernatural powers to get the temple to collapse, to trap our heroes in there so that he can go and find the fountain. And then we have this funny little sequence where everyone's trying to figure out how to get out, and they see a hole at the top of the ceiling, and this is where the kid becomes a little bit useful, and he says, "Hey, everybody, take your sashes, tie them together, and make a rope, and then we can, throw that up there." And there's this funny little joke where his pants drop because he takes his belt off, and Margiana kind of makes eyes at him a little bit, and so then they tie all this up, and then they use a bow and arrow. Sinbad used a bow and arrow to shoot it up there to get it caught. And then you have another really great line, I felt like, in this thing where, oh, no. This was said by the kid earlier. I'm sorry. He says, "My heart is full of bravery, but I have very cowardly legs."
I chuckled at that line.
Yeah, I did too. And then there was another line where they're trying to figure out how to get out, and someone says a live dog is better than a dead lion, which I swear I've heard before. But the line I was trying to get at right here is the kid volunteers to climb up there first, and he says, "I am the lightest." And then Sinbad says, "No, I'm the most foolhardy." So he is the one that climbs up there. I loved it because it's kind of a self-deprecating way to say, no, let me do it. You don't need to.
Yeah.
And then it's actually a pretty suspenseful sequence, I have to say, because you have Sinbad trying to climb up there, and the rod that they use is not entirely secure, so it's wiggling around. And then the homunculus shows up and is trying to get him to fall. And then they're like, okay, we got to shoot this thing with an arrow, and it's the kid trying to use the bow and arrow. So now you've got the suspense of the homunculus trying to make him fall. The anchoring for the arrow is coming loose because he's moving around. And then it's like, well, maybe the kid's going to accidentally shoot him with the arrow. And, it's probably the most suspenseful sequence of the entire film, I have to
I would
say.
agree with that. I would agree with that.
I thought it was great. It was great. And we do get an interesting little bit of the stop motion where it's flying around, but then we see an arrow go through the homunculus and then he falls down. Now, I will admit, the part where the arrow hits the homunculus, not quite as good as the rest of it. It looked a little weird to me.
Yeah, it's a little jumpy because doing like single items flying through the air in stop motion is incredibly difficult, and then you gotta composite it just right so the parts that are used to like make it move don't entirely show through. So it is a little janky. But what I really appreciate is the following scene after this. And by the way, in this moment, the editing is actually pretty nice. It is fast editing, similar to the opening, but with the suspense, it's jumping from the anchor to Sinbad to down below.
Yep.
It's very well done.
Yeah. Oh, and I should mention this entire plan is paying off the line of the movie, which is, tie up your camel. Because they bring up this like, Allah will save us. And it's like, yeah, but tie up your camel. That's when they come up with the plan.
Right. And so one of the things I really appreciate is immediately following this, after the homunculus has been shot, we see our villain like feel a chest pain, like he's just been shot. And I love the fact that, he uses his own blood to create these. So when they get hurt, he feels it. I think that's brilliant.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. And then so Sinbad gets out and he starts chasing down the villain. And then is that when he gets met by the green people?
Yes.
Yeah. So he gets met by the green people. And I wrote down that because I was not expecting green people in this. They're Lemurians. I wrote down, that they were Orions, which is a green-skinned race from Star Trek. Which is interesting that because we never see any female Lemurians; it's all men, which is interesting because in Star Trek at that time, we had only seen female Orions, so these green-skinned women. But still, so they show up, and that's when you hinted at it when you did your synopsis. This is when it starts getting a little bit King Kong-ish.
Right, because you've got these natives who worship a god. They have a temple. They have a whole like drum sequence. They have a whole dancing thing. They plan on offering up the outsiders to their god as sacrifices. And it gets even deeper in the following sequences. But I love their inclusion. I think it's very, very interesting. And it's very different from the rest of the film. And I think that's a great way to breathe new fresh light, new fresh air into this final act. Because once
they are a bit of a wild card.
Yes, it kind of throws you through a loop, and it is a breath fresh of air that changes things up. And for the final act of the film, you kind of have to readjust to this new concept, this new situation that our characters are going to be put into.
Right. And it's also hearkening back to a different kind of classic adventure trope where you run into, we'll say, natives that can either help or hinder you on your journey. And in this case, they are hindering, but they become another obstacle that both our hero and our villain have to overcome. And Kura's the one who really makes that happen, as we've talked about, because he sees the Kali statue. Now, in my notes, before I realized it was Kali, I thought it was Vishnu, which is funny if you've seen Oppenheimer and you know about the famous quote about him talking about Vishnu. But so he makes the statue come to life. And like I said, this is the best sequence in the entire movie, like just from a technical standpoint, because good Lord, that statue is incredible. What Harryhausen does with this choreographed dance sequence and moving around 8 limbs, the 6 arms and the 2 legs. And not just in a walking movement, but in like I said, a choreographed dance that he had to study. He had actual dancers, and he had to study them to see how they would move to make this look authentic. and then have to manipulate like I said, 4 pairs of limbs on this thing. I don't even want to begin to understand how to coordinate all that much. I mean, we love Willis O'Brien for what he did, but at least Kong was a humanoid creature with, the normal amount of limbs. This is a ton more stuff to have to keep track of. And I think Harryhausen even did say, it's like, yeah, I gave myself a bunch of extra work with this. But it comes out astonishingly well. Like I would put this up against any modern bit of CGI. The dance sequence in particular is just absolutely incredible. Yeah, after this, when Kali starts fighting everybody, it's Jason and the Argonauts again. So I think at that point, he's just replicating what he did before that was already superb. But like I said, the dance number is just incredible. And like we said earlier, a lot of extra care was put into it. It has its own unique music by different composers. And like so much care went into this. And I mean, I can't sing its praises more than I already have. Just if you see no other scene in this movie, go watch this one. If it's on YouTube, watch it, because it's just
go watch the whole movie.
Just go watch the whole movie. But if you only watch one part,
it's actually free on YouTube.
Yeah,
it's free on YouTube.
There you go. So you have no excuse. But still, it's just, I think it's the best sequence of the movie.
Yeah, I think this is definitely the highlight in terms of just how it's choreographed in general. I would agree with that. I think this is the peak of the special effects, peak of the integration with the live action stuff, and just how, in a way, this whole sequence just is brand new. It's fresh. You've been watching for the last hour and 20 minutes, and your last, 20, 25 minutes is this whole new almost movie. We changed to caves, we changed to creatures and natives, and a whole nother, like, our villain gets more power. It is a very welcomed change that makes this film feel like it is not overstaying its welcome.
Right. So we have the dance sequence that accomplishes what it needs to, convincing the natives the Lemurians to leave them alone and to think of Kura as this powerful figure that they need to lay off of. And then once Sinbad's crew catches up with everybody, then Kura commands Kali to fight them while he goes off and goes to look for the fountain. And then, like I said, we get the big sword fight sequence, which I will say, it's a great sequence. It's just Jason and the Argonauts again,
right?
But without the skeleton, but without skeletons. Now, from what I've read, that was an incredibly difficult sequence to film for the live action actors, because they had to pay very close attention to what they were doing. So it's well crafted. It is certainly well crafted. It's just not necessarily as original as the dance sequence was. But again, you still have, in this case, instead of it being multiple figures and multiple skeletal figures with the normal amount of limbs, it's actors fighting a 6-armed, sword-carrying creature. Which, that in that case, I would say it's still pretty impressive. It's just, like I said, just not as fresh as it as it could have been. But it's still a good sequence. And by defeating Kali at the end, with the kids' help, he makes himself useful again. That's when they finally find the last third of the talisman, because it was inside of Kali. And then we start heading. Well, no, then the natives capture all of them again, and then that's when we get the Rancor style sequence where we finally get the payoff for this. The eye tattoo. And they don't really fully explain it, and it kind of annoyed me a little bit. But, remind me, what was the significance of the eye tattoo again?
It was a symbol that they also found in the cave.
Right.
And it symbolized the god of the single eye and the fountain's guardian of evil.
Uh-huh.
It was a way for her to be. She's kind of a plot device in this regards because she was meant to be there. And eventually it leads to she's going to be Sinbad's significant other. So that's her destiny. So it's just a way to intertwine her with everything else. Sinbad.
It doesn't entirely make sense. And to be honest, I was a little disappointed that this was the payoff when that's something that we saw basically within the first minute of the movie is this weird, mysterious thing. And I don't know. I was like, really? We forgot about it for like an hour, and now this is our payoff.
Right.
Okay. It was one of the moments where I was a little disappointed with the movie because it seemed like something that was given a lot of weight early on, then got forgotten, and the payoff didn't seem like it matched up with everything else, personally, for me.
Right. Yeah, and I will say this, I think our side characters in general kind of get sidelined at certain points throughout this film, even though they're relevant to the eventual end of the film. They do often frequently become just kind of background characters that we see in the background reacting. I think the best example is when Visor is on the boat with the masked lady coming alive, and he's literally just there like screaming and looking up at this monster and then looking over at Sinbad. And it's like, you're just there reacting to everything. You're just the audience. Like, why are you not doing anything else?
Yeah. So
but that's a common problem in the film, I would say.
And then the weird thing is, I think if I remember correctly, seeing the eye on there kept convinced them not to kill them. But then they took her and they're like, oh, now we're just going to sacrifice you. We get even more King Kong connections here. Then they throw her down into the pit, which again reminded me of Return of the Jedi. And because she falls down there into this pit. There's a cave over there. You hear a monster coming out of the cave, and and then the monster comes out, and it's not a Rancor, it's the Cycloptian Minotaur. Centaur. I almost said Minotaur. Centaur, which I will admit is pretty cool. Combining those two creatures there. And then that's when the Vizier takes his helmet off to distract them for whatever reason. Well, we know why.
And then they all go down into the pit.
They all go down into the pit, but at this point, the monster has taken her away in true King Kong fashion.
Yeah, the whole sequence reeks of King Kong, which is not a bad thing, but it's all very King Kong inspired. And once they get down into the pit, they start looking for her, and they let Korra go to the Fountain of Destiny and do his thing, dropping the tablets in, getting his life force, having the cloak, the shield of darkness, and
which turns him invisible.
This. Right. They let him do that while Sinbad and the crew go find Morgiana, and she's like, but you let him find the fountain. And he's like, I don't care. Like, you're more important. Again, he's valuing these people's lives over the journey, over the end goal. And then when they show up to the Fountain of Destiny, that's when we get our grand fight between the Fountain's guardian of good and evil, the centaur, and the griffin, which is a bird on a lion's body with wings. And then we get a little fight between the two that ends with Korra slicing the heel of the griffin, which causes the centaur to have the upper hand and win. And then we see Sinbad and the others fight the centaur as Korra kind of watches.
And then the Sinbad manages to slay the creature through much effort.
And then we get the final fight, Korra versus Sinbad, what we've been waiting for this entire time. Korra gets the invisible shield of darkness, and then Sinbad and him fight where he turns invisible. And then at this point, Sinbad ends up dropping the piece in, but before he can even do that, as we've already talked about, Korra ends up getting a bit cocky in a brief moment, and Sinbad's able to kill Korra before he can do anything else.
Yeah, because he accidentally makes himself visible by standing inside the fountain's waters,
which ends with the fountain turning into a fountain of blood,
which is kind of creepy.
I thought it was cool. I love that sequence.
It's cool, but it was a little shocking when I saw it. I was like, oh, ooh.
And then Sinbad drops the third piece, which then a crown shows up. Before he sees it, he actually sees his reflection, which this is a great effect of him with the crown on and this beautiful outfit showing him as the king. Sinbad kneels down, the crown appears, he takes it up, but instead of bearing the crown, he gives it to the visor, who then puts the crown on. Well, Sinbad puts the crown on, the visor kind of walks away.
Yeah, I love how the crown fits perfectly on his mask.
Yes, it does. It's really great. And then it slowly fades and dissolves away with him now having an unscarred face. Mm-hmm. Which is a really nice moment. And during all of this, it's kind of theatrical, especially with how the actor for the visor is acting. It's very theatrical with his motions and what he's saying and doing. Mm-hmm. And then he proclaims he is the king. They all bow to him. Mm-hmm. And then we get back to the ship.
Actually, fun fact, Ray Harryhausen's best friend in the world, Ray Bradbury, the author, actually told him when he saw the movie, he's like, why didn't you have the guy shed a tear after his face was restored? And Harryhausen's like, oh yeah, we just didn't think to do it at the time. But I wish we had.
Now, following this sequence, we get our wrap-up scene, our conclusion, where Sinbad's back on the boat with everybody else, and Margarena is with them, and she asks why he didn't take the crown, because that would have been, he would have had everything. And again, the idea of freedom comes back up, because then he says a king is never truly free, and he wants to be a free man. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a very interesting concept, the idea of no matter what, with responsibility comes a level of entrapment. You can't truly be free. You have to have loyalty. You have to have a commitment to something.
Yeah, it's the Spider-Man concept, with great power comes great responsibility. Yeah, you can be a king, but being a king requires things of you.
And Sinbad knows that is not what he wants, and he knows that is not fit for him. So he lets the visor have it, which is a really nice final moment for the two who have been on this journey from almost the beginning. Mm-hmm. And then with this, he and Margarina get together, ending with a kiss. And as the movie began with an establishing shot of the boat, it ends with a establishing shot of the boat, concluding the film.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's a very nice bookend, because this is Sinbad the Sailor after all. And, so it only makes sense to end on a ship. So that's our movie. And like I said, we're going in reverse order here, but I definitely enjoyed this more than Eye of the Tiger. I think it's a better movie than Eye of the Tiger, in large part because of the cast. I think it's a stronger cast, particularly with the presence of Tom Baker. And it's got some really standout sequences in terms of the special effects. I'm just overall incredibly happy with this. If you're going into this looking for an exciting fantasy adventure movie, you're going to really get an exciting fantasy adventure movie.
I would agree. with that. There's plenty to enjoy in the film.
Mm-hmm. In fact, we had hinted at it at the beginning of our discussion, but Roger Ebert certainly said that, and Harryhausen said that was his favorite review for the movie.
Oh, there you go.
Ebert wrote that he had a friend. He asked a friend, hey, have you seen any good movies this summer? And he said, only Sinbad. And Ebert's explanation for that was, quote, because it did one of two things movies are supposed to do. It created and sustained a fantasy. It was an exciting escapist adventure. It was fun. End quote.
Hey, that goes back to what I said earlier, too.
Exactly. Exactly. So, I do have you have a little bit of a Toku topic as well. Toku topic as we do on the Film Vault that you want to talk about. Do you want to go first or should I?
Mine happens to pertain to post-film release, post everything. So I'll let you go first.
Okay. So, because I did a little bit of research, I mentioned that I would do this last year, actually. I did a little bit of research on Sinbad the Sailor as a folkloric character. Because he's not as prominent as other, we'll say, mythic heroes, but he's got enough out there, particularly if you're going through the filmography of Harryhausen. He did 3 movies with Sinbad, more than any other character. But the stories of Sinbad the Sailor are attributed to 1001 Arabian Nights, or just Arabian Nights, which is a collection of Middle Eastern stories. And they take place during this is what I couldn't remember earlier, the Abbasid Caliphate, which was in the 8th and 9th century. Now, this is when they were written down. They were probably told orally a lot sooner than that, probably as far back as that caliphate. Because the first European translation of 1001 Arabian Nights was by Antoine Galland. The first English version appeared in 1711, and this was based in part on a 4-volume 16th century Syrian manuscript. And then they were published separately in English around 1770. And then they gained popularity in the United States with the 1794 Philadelphia edition, which included other famous stories from Arabian Nights like Aladdin and the Lamp and things like that. And then there were numerous new editions published in the 19th century, which made him even more popular. The best known translation in English is that of Sir Richard Burton, who was a linguist, a writer, and an explorer. And he wrote a widely popular 16-volume series on the Arabian, he called the Arabian Nights Entertainments, or the Book of 1,000 Nights and a Night, which was published between 1885 and 1888. Now, here's the interesting thing about Arabian Nights. The framing story with it is that you have the wife of a king who has decided to execute her, and she keeps telling him a story every night. And she always leaves it off basically with a cliffhanger. So he keeps delaying the execution. And then after 1001 Nights, he just decides not to execute her. So there's an actual extra layer of suspense within even the Sinbad story when you know that particular context. Now, Sinbad, that's the Anglicized version of the name. He's also called Sinbad or Sindbad with a D. And it's believed that the character's origins are probably entwined with Middle Eastern, Persian, and Indian folk tales, which actually makes those Persian and Indian elements in this movie not quite as strange. And the earliest versions of these stories, as part of the Arabian Nights, appeared in Arabic manuscripts during the Islamic Golden Age, which was from the 8th to the 14th century. And it was marked by significant advances in science, technology, literature, and culture under the Abbasid Caliphate. And it was also a massive age of exploration. So here's the thing. I don't know if you knew this. This does not come up in any of these movies. There's actually 2 Sinbads.
Really?
Yeah, there's Sinbad the Sailor, who is the adventurer. And there's also Sinbad the Porter. So the framing story, you have Sinbad the Porter who meets Sinbad the Sailor, and so it's a framing story, I guess, within a framing story. And Sinbad the Porter meets Sinbad the Sailor, and he keeps having dinner with him every night. And he keeps telling him about another one of his voyages, and he always says like, "Oh, that's one, but I'll tell you about the next one tomorrow." And then by the end of it, he basically says, "Hey, Sinbad the Porter, why don't you, come live with me and we'll be like brothers." And the whole premise is that it's like a fairy tale where you're learning some different lessons listening to these 7 different voyages that Sinbad went on. Learning things about like cleverness and over brute strength and things like that. Yeah. So, he was introduced as a Baghdad merchant, has fantastic adventures, mythical creatures, supernatural phenomena, exotic lands. Yeah. And like I said, it was probably came from merchants and sailors who were traversing the Indian Ocean and the Maritime Silk Road. So it's just exaggerated versions of those. And there's a distinct narrative to each one of these 7 different voyages. So it's departure from home, encounter with challenges, and a proverbial return, which one of the sources I looked at argued has been very influential on literature ever since then and entertainment, because it follows that hero's journey. And these stories are not only meant to entertain, but they're supposed to, like I said, impart moral lessons about bravery, resourcefulness, things like that. And let me see. So Sinbad has interactions with different societies, and his responses to these various moral and ethical challenges, they reflect the virtues of the Islamic culture at the time related to hospitality, honesty, and cleverness. And they also showcase some of the economic and social growth that was going on at the time during this caliphate. Because these Arab and Muslim traders were exploring new trade routes and discovering new cultures. A lot of these exotic locales were east of Africa and south of Asia. Quote, "In modern literature and film, elements of Sinbad's tales can be seen in the episodic structures of adventure stories and in the archetypal character of the explorer or adventurer. The impact of these stories is evident in the works of authors like Jules Verne and C.S. Lewis, who incorporate the fantastical and the journey into the unknown in their works." End quote. And then one last little note here I wanted to bring up is obviously Harryhausen's adaptations are not the only screen adaptations of Sinbad. There are a lot of them. If you just look up Sinbad the Sailor on Wikipedia, there's an entire section with a long list of different adaptations. Where I broke it up into I think it's English language animated films, non-English animated, English live action, non-English live action. There's a bunch of them. Screen Rant rated 19 live action film. Well, no, just 19 Sinbad movies altogether. There was a television show that was on for a couple of years that I watched when I was a kid. But just to give a couple of quick highlights, the earliest English language adaptation of Sinbad was a 1935 animated short produced and directed by, I am not entirely sure how to say this name, but Ub Iwerks, which is in public domain, and you can actually just go on Wikipedia and watch it on Wikipedia. It's about 7 minutes long. And then a year later, in 1936, and I bring this up because it's kind of a high-profile appearance, but you had Popeye the Sailor meets Sinbad the Sailor, which was a 2-reel short animated subject, and it was produced by Fleischer Studios for Paramount. And if you are an animation aficionado, the Fleischers are very significant. They did a lot of great early animation, and one of the things that they're really well known for is the Superman shorts from the 1940s. And then the first American live-action film was 1942's Arabian Nights, but Sinbad is just part of an ensemble. He's not the main character. His first American live-action film that's just about him was Sinbad the Sailor in 1947, which was directed by Richard Wallace and starred Douglas Fairbanks Jr., Maureen O'Hara, and Walter Slezak and Anthony Quinn. And it's supposed to be the 8th voyage of Sinbad, where he discovers a lost treasure of Alexander the Great, because of course he does. And then there was also a silent live action film in India, 1930, which I think technically makes it the oldest screen adaptation of Sinbad. And then, because obviously it has to be brought up, there was an animated Japanese film in 1962, and also, as I think we talked about this before we started recording, there was also a live action film about Sinbad produced in Japan by Toho in the early 60s.
So technically it's not Sinbad. Its Japanese title is The Great Thief. It was titled Samurai Pirate by AIP, later changed to The Lost World of Sinbad. So it's kind of a gray area. It's a Sinbad movie in name only, kind of like the Italian films that got turned into Hercules movies, even though they were never supposed to be that. But it is important to note, Toshiro Mifune does play the main character in that film, and it does have Mei Hama, who was in King Kong vs. Godzilla as Fumiko Sakurai in King Kong vs. Godzilla, Kumi Mizuno, and Akiko Wakabayashi.
Yes.
All very popular, very famous people in the Showa era. Yep. And it is a film that was written by Takashi Kimura, also known as Karu Mabuchi, and Shinichi Sekizawa.
I was going to bring that up. It's one of that's probably the only full collaboration that they ever really did together.
Yeah, I think there's like 2 or 3 others. Technically, Godzilla versus Gigan, kind of, and Megalon, kind of.
And Megalon, kind of, but this one was like, near as we can tell, they worked on that one together.
Correct.
Which makes me pretty excited to actually see this movie. Yeah. So,
did you have anything else you wanted to bring up in your?
Nope, okay. That's everything.
So mine is a little interesting tidbit about what happened after the film came out. So the Golden Voyage of Sinbad started a very lengthy lawsuit against Columbia Pictures. So in the early 1970s, Columbia was in a very bad financial spot. The company was in debt millions of dollars. They ended up getting bought out, and they fired all the management of Columbia Pictures. New people were brought in. Then they started a partnership with Warner Brothers called the Burbank Studios, because they both had backlots in Burbank, California. They had a new CEO, everything. Like they had a whole overhaul. So in 1973, actually 1972, there was a problem. Columbia couldn't afford to produce and distribute and market the films they were making. So because of the financial ruin, they actually opened up to private investments. A millionaire with the last name of Persky collaborated with a friend of his with the last name of Bright, and they created the company Persky Bright Associates, which had them and a dozen other millionaires to help financially back films. So initially, their plan was to only be financial backers, but they decided that they wanted to go into releasing films as well. So they actually acquired the rights to one of Columbia's films, and that was shelved. They weren't going to do anything with it. They bought it and they started releasing it. It ended up being a way to prevent tax write-offs, which is actually oddly relevant to the modern day because Wile E. Coyote versus Acme, the idea of studios, Batgirl's another one, writing off films because they're bombing or they don't go release. They can write those off and get tax breaks. So Golden Voyage was actually the second film from Columbia that Persky Bright Associates worked on. It was considered a low-risk film and nobody really valued it, but Persky loved pulp films and pulp stories, so he wanted to back the film. Actually, in an interview, he actually brought up that in rentals, Golden Voyage of Sinbad made $9 million alone.
Really?
So it was a very successful film.
He said 9. My source said 6.
9 million for rentals. So the way it worked was the proceeds of the film would be split between Columbia Pictures and repayment for promissory notes that Persky Bright had made on each film. For anybody that doesn't know what those are, they're little written notes that are saying like, I, Elijah Thomas, agree to borrow $2,000 from Nathan Marchand, and we'll pay back by this point in time. And that was the deal. Now, interestingly enough, because they were buying the rights to distribute, they were giving Columbia the money to distribute them, so they were buying the rights. They weren't going to another distributor. They were using Columbia, but they were giving Columbia the money to do it. So that happened with Golden Voyage of Sinbad. That was part of their deal, from what I've been able to figure out. So what happened was, in 1974, legal trouble fell upon Columbia Pictures, with Lester Persky and Dick Bright claiming that there was some manipulation of the books to not give them the money they were owed, because they were borrowing money from various people, right? So Golden Voyage is one of those films, but this was about 6 or 7 movies. They invested over $25 million by 1976. So, as you can imagine, millions of dollars, rights issues, that led to a legal lawsuit that ended in 1980. It took a while for this to actually go through. So it was a very long thing. I skimmed most of it, but essentially the legal charges claimed that, quote, Columbia engaged in various practices which had the effect of reducing competition in the market for the licensing of Bright Persky Associates films. So they were saying that, like, they were manipulating the market a little bit on how they were releasing them. They also said, quote, Columbia materially breached its contractual and fiduciary, also known as trustee, duties by delaying or failing to report revenue, which is how they would get their payments. So Columbia was, in theory, they claimed that Columbia was stealing money from them, right? They also accused Columbia of failing to credit them for success, which, as you see, nowhere in Golden Voyage are they credited at all. He actually, funny enough, Persky also financed Taxi Driver, but you don't hear his name anywhere in that, do you? Mm-mm. Yeah, so he financed dozens of movies and never got credit. So in the 70s, he wanted to start changing that, but it ended up not really working out. He's only credited for 4 or 5 films. But he accused them of not exploiting the films in all territories as they should, not refunding prepaid money that was unused, so they would give them money for budgets, and then if it didn't get used, they wouldn't hand it back. They would write it in as, oh, hey, we used the whole budget. You don't get that money back. And purported option, and they threatened essentially to use purported options to distribute films, which is freezing the agreement. So that would be like if I said, hey, Nathan, let's record a podcast. And then I say mid-podcast, oh, I have to wait. We have to put a pause on this. And I go do something else. Mm-hmm. So they would threaten to do that in order to distribute the films. And they would do that. And it was a whole process that they claimed they weren't even following proper business practices. So all of this ended in 1980. It was also accused that a lot of the main people of Columbia were evading taxes, which oddly relevant to rich, famous people right now, if you catch my drift. And so you would think with all this, there would be some evidence here, right? And, they also accused them of copyright infringement because they technically bought the rights to these films and then just had Columbia distribute them. But because there was a lot of oh, they said this, they did this, without a lot of evidence, there wasn't really a paper trail to follow. The lawsuit in everything that Persky Bright Associates tried to get was dismissed. Mm. They went into this court for 5 years roughly, and they got nothing out of it. And I think Columbia ended up just getting a pass on everything. Everything was denied.
Wow.
So Golden Voyage of the Sinbad. Oh, and that's partially why there was no sequel to this. Part of that was because...
No, I guess official sequel. I mean, you did have Eye of the Tiger. But
Correct. But they were going to do a sequel But that ended up falling through when the whole lawsuit started, because part of that was, hey, we paid for this, we own this, you can't do this. And because that happened from 1974 all the way to 1980, by that point they did Eye of the Tiger, which was not a direct sequel, which probably explains why it was not a direct sequel. So Golden Voyage started a lawsuit with Columbia Pictures. Just think about that.
That's crazy.
Now, before we wrap things up here and end on the most noblest of traditions, we got a few things more. But before we do those, do you have any more notes you wanted to cover, or did we?
No. I was expecting we would be getting into our ranking and the cast and crew.
Okay. Well, before we do that, I have one note that I didn't get to say yet.
What's that?
And that is, so the magical spells that Korra says at the beginning of the film, let me read them off to you. Spoop, Okok, Rof, Okuk, me. You want to know what that means?
What does it mean?
It's backwards for I'm cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs.
Are you kidding?
Here's the second one. He says, Titsbar, Gilis, Yilumno, Sik, Rofra, Ixt. You want to know what that means?
What is it?
Tricks are for kids only, silly rabbits.
You're kidding.
Nope.
Wow.
Popular cereal brand slogans were used backwards for the magical spells spoken by the antagonist of this film.
That is amazing.
And so with that, if you're ready, we can transition here into the casting crew.
Alrighty.
For a brief moments. So starting with our cast, John Philip Law played Sinbad. He was also in Barbarella, Tarzan the Ape Man, The Spiral Staircase, Night Train to Terror, Moon in Scorpio, Space Mutiny, Alienator, and Curse of the 49er.
Okay.
Tom Baker, who played Prince Cora, was in Frankenstein, The True Story, The Curse of King Tut's Tomb, The Mutations, Vault of Horror, Dungeons and Dragons, The Wolves of Wilgiri Chase, Enemy Mine, and Doctor Who. Takis Emmanuel played Ahmed, the actor. No real credits to give for him. Robert Reitzi played Ahmed, the voice actor, was in Thunderball, Never Say Never Again, The Omen, Hannibal, Dr. No, Lawrence of Arabia, and Gulliver's Travels. Also, he was an ADR director. I hypothesize he directed some of the stuff for this film, considering he did ADR. Caroline Munro, who played Margarina, was in Casino Royale, Dracula AD 1972, Captain Kronos, Vampire Hunter, At the Earth's Core, The Spy Who Loved Me, Star Crash, Maniac, The Last Horror Film, Don't Open Till Christmas, Strangler High, or Slaughter High, Faceless, Night Owl, Flesh for the Beast. Gregory Aslan.
I forgot she was in Star Crash, which is a little astonishing. Yeah. And she kind of was a Bond girl, too. So
Gregory Aslan played Hakim. He was in the Ray Harryhausen film, The Three Worlds of Gulliver. David Garfield played Abdul. He was credited as John D. Garfield, was in Hollywood Horror House, Damon, Omen 2. He was in the editorial department for that film. The Beast Within, he was also editorial for that. He was the editor for The Karate Kid Part 2 and the editor for Frankenstein the College Years. Kurt Christian played Harun, was in Horror Hospital, Sinbad and Eye of the Tiger, and The Time Crystal. Martin Shaw played Rakid, who was in the the film adaptation of Macbeth. Aldo Sambrel played Omar, was in A Fistful of Dollars, For a Few Dollars More, Monster from 1980, Satan's Baby Doll, and Fresh Flesh for the Beast, which she co-starred in with Caroline Munro. Just a note, A Fistful of Dollars and For a Few Dollars More were adaptations of Akira Kurosawa films. That's why they're included. Robert Shaw played the Oracle of Knowledge, uncredited. He was in From Russia with Love, Jaws, and The Deep. Douglas Wilmer played the Visor, who was in The Vampire Lovers, Octopussy, and Sword of the Valiant.
Oh, Sword of the Valiant. That's a movie. I want to watch the rest of that at some point. That has Sean Connery in it. It's an Arthurian movie.
As for the crew, Gordon Hessler is your director. He directed The Woman Who Wouldn't Die, The Oblong Box. He was also the producer on Scream and Scream Again, Cry of the Banshee, Murders of the Rue Morgue, Scream Pretty Peggy, Wonder Woman, 2 episodes of the TV show, Tales of the Hunter, and Pray for Death. Brian Clemens, your writer and story by, was in The Telltale Heart, See No Evil, Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde, Captain Kronos, Vampire Hunter, the same film that Miss Munro was in. He directed that as well. Highlander 2, The Quickening, and Highlander the series.
Oh, no, Highlander 2.
Charles H. Sheener, the producer, also worked on various Ray Harryhausen films, including Clash of the Titans, Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger, The Valley of Gwangi, First Men in the Moon, Jason and the Argonauts, Mysterious Island, The Three Worlds of Gulliver, The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, 20 Million Miles to Earth, Earth versus the Flying Saucers, and It Came from Beneath the Sea. Miklos Rosa, the composer, did music for The Thief of Baghdad. Also, fair warning, a lot of these credits actually were just stock music and he was uncredited for. He had music in Superman, the 1948 serial series, But Abbott and Lou Costello Meet the Invisible Man, Captain Video, Master of the Stratosphere, Earth versus the Flying Saucers, Zombies of Molta Taru, 20 Million Miles to Earth, The World, The Flesh, The Devil, Time After Time. So that is your cast and crew. And with that, I think we're on to our rankings.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, we've talked a lot about Ray Harryhausen. We've, mentioned a bunch of his movies already. All right, so the ranking. So we are going to be ranking just the 3 films that we have covered so far in this series. Both of us have seen other Harryhausen movies, but we're sticking to what we've seen so far. So, number 3. I think we're probably going to agree on this one.
Number 3, I feel like it's Sinbad movie. Are we correct?
Yes.
Okay. Sinbad and the
Eye of the Tiger. Yeah. So it's just, yeah. You and I both agreed that, it's just not all that impressive overall.
I fell asleep.
You fell asleep. So, I mean, that tells you everything you need to know.
That tells me everything I need to know.
It tells you everything you need to know. Now, I do think 1 and 2 potentially might be different. I'm not sure.
I think they're going to end up being the same.
Okay. What's your number 2?
My number 2 is The Golden Voyage of Sinbad.
Oh, we do agree. Because mine is also Golden Voyage. Although I will admit, I went a little bit back and forth at certain points, trying to decide if I wanted that one or Clash of the Titans. Because I'm guessing Clash of the Titans is number 1.
Clash of the Titans number 1.
Clash of the Titans is number 1 because that's the big finale where, that's the massive send-off. It's the end of an era in a lot of ways. And yes, it feels like it feels like a 1980 movie, but it also feels very much like a throwback at the same time. Whereas I will admit, Golden Voyage has several sequences in this. I mean, we sung the praises of the acting is tremendous and all of the production value that it has. There are sequences in it that I do think rival a lot of the stuff that we see in Clash of the Titans, but then there's also a lot of stuff that's been done before.
Yeah.
Which I think is really what brings it down for me, is the fact that there are more sequences that are just calling back to what had already been done.
Yeah, I agree. At the end of the day, I think Golden Voyage is a lot of familiarity, which is not a bad thing when you're talking about Harryhausen, but because it's so familiar, it doesn't do a lot of new exciting things or reinventing anything. It just ends up being a little middle of the road.
Yeah.
Like, it's good. It's not great. It's not bad or okay. It's good.
Yeah. It's one of the few times where I would honestly say that what really helps prop the movie up is actually the stuff besides the Harryhausen effects.
Oh, yeah. If if it wasn't for such a great crew and cast, I think this film would fail, if I'm going to be honest.
Yeah. Which, I don't know. I think it depends on the movie. Some people would tell you that there are certain movies that you only watch for the Harryhausen effects, which I can totally understand. I think I heard somebody once observe that, interestingly, Harryhausen often, actually, I think basically every movie Harryhausen had, he was limited on his budget. He never really got a big budget movie. Except maybe Clash of the Titans. I think you could make that argument that was pretty big budget for Harryhausen.
Yeah.
But then you had his successors like your Phil Tippett's and all that, who got like the massive, big budget Hollywood blockbusters. So the point in that argument is that, imagine what Harryhausen could have done if he had a true big budget blockbuster on his hands. Some would argue that the fact that he didn't is probably what led to a lot of what he did.
I would agree with that.
Yeah. But, what?
I was just going to say, I feel like we've done a pretty good job at breaking down the film and its coverage. I honestly, this has been my favorite discussion we've done so far.
It has been great. It has been great. And thankfully, I don't think you said anything that's going to trigger some of our friends, like you did with Clash of the Titans. You ruffled some feathers. You ruffled some feathers with Clash of the Titans.
Speaking of all this, while he's gone, I just want to bring up Jimmy never sent me a letter. We talked about it last time. He was going to send me a letter, but he never did. Oh. He's a failure. I'm waiting for that email. You bring it, Jimmy. I dare you. I double dog dare you.
Oh, you're whipping out the double dog dares.
I am.
No, you can't get out of it now.
Also, just, with us both being on cast right now, there was something that you said last recording I wanted to bring up as we wrap things up here with our closing banter.
All right.
And we're going to get your live reaction here. So in the recording last time on The Monster Conversation, Harryhausen Annual number 2, Sinbad in the Eye of the Tiger, 1977, you say, quote, "You're catching up. It's making me nervous," end quote. Nathan, 2023. Now, Nathan, you are now officially behind Kaiju Conversation. What's your take on that, Mr. Marchand?
Congratulations and enjoy it while it lasts.
While it lasts. While it lasts. He says that like he thinks he'll take that crown back.
Oh.
I am like the king at the end of Golden Voyage.
Are you the vizier now?
I am the vizier.
I guess that makes me Sinbad, right? And I'm like, I like my freedom. You can
call
keep it.
Call to Allah, but wear your camel's back. I said that right?
No.
Close enough.
Close enough.
But no, this has been a lot of fun, Nathan. I enjoyed it a lot. Thank you for once again joining me in this celebration of yours, mine's, and Ray.
Yes. Our new band.
Our new band. Now, before we conclude in the most noblest of podcasting traditions, as I like to dub thee.
Yes.
Happy birthday, Nathan.
Happy birthday, Elijah.
And a great old heavenly birthday to Mr. Ray Harryhausen.
Indeed. But yes, that noblest of podcasting traditions.
That's copyrighted. You can't say that.
Oh, okay, fine. I'll go with my shameless self-promotion. There.
There we go.
Both sticks have been satisfied. Yeah.
A true crossover. Well, now the question becomes, which of us gets to go first? Because you got a script. I do. Well, why don't we do this? Let's start with yours.
All right.
Because as the listeners know, there will be two versions of this. Yes. One with Nathan's conclusion, one with my conclusion. So if this is the end of my spiel, I guess we should do our personal sign-offs and then the podcast.
Yes.
So would you like to start, or do you want me to start with my sign-off?
You know what? You go ahead.
Hello, I'm Elijah, and I have a kaiju and tokusatsu problem. Joking aside, I am Elijah Thomas. I co-host the podcast, Kaiju Conversation, with my co-host and good friend Rex. We cover the wide world of tokusatsu, from kaiju and giant monsters to henshin heroes and J-horror. You can find us on any podcast platform you use and follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at kaiju_converse on all of those sites. I'm also part of the rotating hosts for Monsters with Attitude. You can check us out on YouTube, where we do monthly live streams talking kaiju entertainment. You can also head over to Facebook and join our Facebook group. It's a great place to talk with like-minded people. I'm also a writer. I've written for GodzillaMovies.com and in Kaiju Ramen Magazine. Currently, I write for Kaiju United, and my writing has also been featured in the book Giant Bug Cinema, a Monster Kid's Guide from Bear Manor Media, where I wrote about Ghidorah, the three-headed monster. Outside of writing and podcasting, I also served as a consultant on the upcoming Titanic Creations officially licensed Yongari action figure. You can go to titanicreations.com/Yongari, YONGARY, and pre-order yours today. We're at a little over 500 pre-orders. Let's get it to the 800 so we can get all the special stuff that comes with the release. You can also join the Titanic Creations text subscription or email subscription to get updates on that and their upcoming Pulgasari figure. I've also had the privilege to produce bonus features for SRS Cinema. I've worked on Yuzo, The Biggest Battle Tokyo, Liverleaf, and I'm developing materials for the upcoming War of the Ninja Monsters, Jiron vs. Gora on Blu-ray, and I even did a commentary track for Yuzo. You can order all of these Blu-rays and pre-order Ninja Monsters on srscinema.com.
Note to self, when you get to Yuzo, bring Elijah on.
I'm also a filmmaker and YouTuber. You can check out my stuff on my YouTube channel, ET13 Productions, where you can see some of my short films, my old YouTube videos, and along with a ever-growing playlist that features all of my appearances on YouTube. I do plan on getting some new videos out soon, so definitely stay tuned for that. I also appeared in a kaiju movie, little-known film called Zillafoot from 2021. I made a brief cameo in the film as Skywatcher number 2. It's got a rating of 3.7 out of 10 on IMDb. So if you're looking to watch more kaiju, you can also buy the Blu-ray on srscinema.com or the DVD from any major online retailer. Or just watch it for free on Tubi with ads, or go on Amazon Prime and buy it.
And
you can
then
also check
you can
out
listen to our podcast episode on it. The definitive podcast on that movie.
You can also check out my action figure photography on my Instagram at ET13_productions and my X, the artist formerly known as Twitter, thanks Danny, at the same handle. Also, just a quick note, my film Edokami no Gyakushu, translated as Well God's Counterattack, will be premiering at G-Fest. If you're going, please go to the amateur video contest, as it is a contestant in that contest. If it does well, I'm hoping to put it into more film festival circuits, so stay tuned for that. Nathan, what do you got?
Obviously, you listen to the credits to hear where you can follow the MIFV on all of the socials. And if you want to send us feedback, you can email us at monsterislandfilmvault@gmail.com. Like I said, listen to the pre-recorded credits to get all of the important information related to that. Well, obviously, you can follow the Film Vault on all of the socials, on X, the artist formerly known as Twitter, as you like to put it, and as Danny likes
thanks,
to put
Danny.
it. Yes, thanks, Danny. And also on Instagram and on Facebook. And do join the Markalite Lounge official Facebook group for the Film Vault on Facebook, as well as the Markalite Lounge Discord server as well. And I should also let everybody know that I was the co-host of both The Power Trip, A Journey Through the Power Rangers franchise with Michael Hamilton, and Henshin Men, which are both tokusatsu superhero shows. They are doing a DBZ Styles fusion dance into a new podcast called Henshin Power V3, which I will be co-hosting with my friends Jake Hambrick and Christopher Reiner. That will be launching on Ultraman Day, July 10th. 2024, so stay tuned for that. We'll be kicking that show off with, obviously, Kamen Rider V3. If you want to check out my writings, you check out my author website at nathanjsmarchand.com, where you can see my relatively updated blog where I muse about whatever's on my mind at that moment, and also learn about where all the different places where I've written, such as Kaiju United, Giant Bug Cinema. But you wrote about Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster. I got stuck with Monster from Green Hell.
Hey, at least you got to write for a published book.
I did, and it was nominated for a Rondo, so I can definitely put that on my resume. And, so you'll learn about all my books there, including a kaiju novella that I co-wrote with my friends Natasha and Nick Hayden and Timothy Deal. It's called Destroyer. And there's also some other collections that I've done that are kaiju related, such as Attack of the Kaiju Volume 2 for Wild Hunt Press. And I think that, that's basically everything. Oh, and check out Scyther Inc. Productions, which is fan-produced audio dramas, including X-Men and Power Rangers, where I infamously play Rito, and Deadpool, of all people. And as, by the time that this gets published, I will have made my debut as Johnny Storm, baby, the Human Torch on Avengers, the audio drama. I think I've covered basically everything. So I think we're good to go.
Well, in that case, I think it's time to conclude with our sign-offs.
All righty.
Don't forget to rate us on iTunes. That boosts our ratings and helps us get recommended to more people just like you. If you don't have an Apple device, which I don't blame you, I don't actually, that's a lie. I'm literally reading the script off of a MacBook. You can rate us on Spotify. To stay up to date with all things Kaiju Conversation related, head over to www.kaijuconversation.com to find our episodes, social media, news, and updates. Follow us on Twitter at KAIJU_CONVERS. If you don't have Twitter, you can follow us on Instagram or like us on Facebook. If you're like me before podcasting and you don't have any social media, lucky you. You can email us at kaijuconversation@gmail.com, all lowercase, all one word, you know the drill. And as always, we'll read your reviews on air for everyone to hear. We also have a Teespring store. Eventually, we'll have original artwork on there, but until then, you can sport our awesome logo on a t-shirt or maybe even a coffee mug. If you'd like to chat with us, check out our Discord server full of others that have similar interests to you. Recently, in the General 1 chat, there was a discussion about how the Oscars held a Q&A with the Ultraman Rising director. It's a great community full of great people. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you can be notified anytime we upload a video. We sometimes post exclusives to the channel, like bloopers for episodes or minisodes talking about news or other subjects. We also have an interview with Mechagodzilla designer Jared Krzyzewski on the channel. I definitely botched his name, and I'm so sorry for that. We also host a monthly show called Kaiju Conversation Live, where I go live with one special guest, and we just have a casual conversation. And a huge thanks to Rex for editing all of the episodes we do, except for this one. Thanks, Nathan, for editing this. All of his links, Rex's, can be found in the description below. Along with Rex, we'd like to give a huge thanks and shout out to Danny DeMana of the Godzilla Novelization Project for his amazing vocals on our theme song. You can support him by following him on Twitter at Danzilla93_GMP or visit his website, GodzillaNovelizationProject.com. And a huge thanks to Grattan Conwell from the podcast Giant Monster BS for composing the music for our theme song. You can support him by following the podcast on Twitter at Giant Monster BS or on any podcast platform under the name Giant Monster BS. And with that, we're going to wrap things up here. So thank you guys so much for listening. And as always, please remember, life's too short to not talk big. Bye, guys.
Cue the credits! Thank you for listening to the Monster Island Film Vault, a podcast produced and hosted by Nate Marchand. Our executive producer is Damon Noyes. If you want to be heard on the show, we'd love to hear from you, so email us at monsterislandfilmvault@gmail.com. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok. You can also follow Jimmy from NASA on Twitter and our many colorful characters using the links in the show notes, which are on our website, monsterislandfilmvault.com. Don't forget to join our official Facebook group and Discord server, The Markalite Lounge. Our podcast logo was designed by Rebecca Hudgens. Follow her on Twitter and Instagram at super_r_illustrations. Sound effects sourced from freesound.org and created by JP Gant. Our theme song is Wanderer on the Offensive, live edit by B33J, Sarax, Juan Madrano, and Nonsensical Lexus, which is a remix of Counterattack and The Opened Way by Kowatani from Shadow of the Colossus. Additional music includes Every Country Has a Monster, performed by Jonah Ray, and Chant My Name, a cover by Second Archive of the song by Masaki Endo. All film and audio clips belong to their respective copyright holders, and no infringement is intended or implied. Please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and/or Podchaser to spread the word about the show. You can even support us by joining MIFV Max on Patreon. MIFV is a Moonlighting Ninjas media production and a proud member of Pod Nation. Sayonara!